Hello and welcome, guys. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. This is Affinity, Chaos. Chapter 801. Gray looked at the group as they prepared for the raid. So, how do you plan to deal with the experts in the capital? He asked. This was a question he asked the first time they asked him to join them. He refused because they didn't give him any tangible reply. According to what we found out, the top experts are not in the capital. But they aren't far from the capital as well. Since you're good with arrays, you will work with her to create a large array that will block every single distress signal from going out. The leader of the group pointed at one of the young ladies in the group. She was among the 5 geniuses he fought with. Have you seen the size of the city? Gray looked at the leader of the group as if he was a clown. He didn't expect them to create an array that would stop any signal from going out in such a short time. The capital was huge, it would take them a long time to complete, and the task was exhausting as well. I've been working on it for some time now, I just need a few more details. The young lady stepped forward. Oh, if that's the case, then no problem. Gray nodded. He wasn't someone who would shy away from things like this raid, but if these people wanted to stress him because of his skill, then he didn't mind leaving them now. It wasn't like he couldn't escape on his own after all. The leader of the group continued assigning positions and gave out orders. He wasn't a bad leader given how everyone seemed to listen to him. After almost 30 minutes of continuous speech, it was time to leave. When Gray heard their target, he couldn't help but shake his head. He originally thought they wanted to raid the capital for treasures, only now did he know that they were doing this to save the humans inside the capital. They wanted to save every human they could find. How amusing, he said to himself as he followed the group. There was a reason they were doing this, and honestly, he does not care. He would only do something like this when someone he's close with is captured. If not, he preferred not to involve himself in any squabbles that might be dangerous. A group of over 25 people walked out. Gray and the young lady were the first to leave the group since they had the job of securing their time there. The young lady had told Gray a few things about the array, but he would only know if to modify it after seeing it. The young lady made the array outside of the capital, linking small arrays together to form a large one that would cover the capital completely. What was left was to create the array at the front gate to ensure that the array will be complete. While the young lady was thinking of a plan, Gray strolled right to the front gate in a leisurely manner, and before anyone could say a word, he used the fire and water element to create some sort of mist that spread out. In the blink of an eye, the vision of everyone there had been impaired. There was no way anyone would know he was not from the Horned race with this much mist around. The guards at the front gate were alerted by this and quickly rushed forward. Before the few wind elementalists could use their wind element to blow the mist away, Gray was gone. Simple and effective. The young lady never thought that what she had been thinking about would be solved in such an easy way. Gray didn't even act like someone who was making an effort, he only walked there and back within a few seconds, and he not only created the array, but he did it unnoticed. This was the front gate of an enemy race. Gray's boldness and quick thinking were something that astounded the young lady. Having multiple elements has its perks. She couldn't help but mutter when Gray returned. Naturally. Gray nodded while looking at the alarmed Horned people. He knew that the sudden mist would make them a little unsettled, but it wouldn't really change anything. The group of 5 geniuses was the only peak overlord plane elementalists they had in their group. Even if most of the top-level experts were not in the capital, there are bound to be some there. Gray had always been the cautious type, so whenever he made plans, he would think of every possible scenario that might happen. Void was still hidden from them, so they knew nothing of his hidden card. He also had his domain, which he could use against even those top-level experts here. The group got to where Gray and the young lady were located, and the leader asked why they were still there. The young lady told him how Gray was able to easily complete the array. All right, we'll continue as planned. The leader nodded, pleased at how Gray made things easier for them. You will ensure that the array isn't destroyed. The leader pointed at the young lady before turning his attention to Gray. Your services are still needed inside. Gray nodded with a blank expression. The young man asked Gray if he could use his mist to hide them as they entered the city. Gray nodded and did as told. He asked if there were any other dual elementalists that had the water and fire element. Making mist was an easy trick, so it wasn't something he had to teach them. Only one person had both the fire and water elements. They created a larger mist this time and even did what looked like a rainstorm above them with lightning dancing in the clouds. Seeing the lightning storm coming closer to the front gate, the guards were cautious and a little confused. They didn't know what to do, but seeing the mist below it, they knew this was not ordinary. Chapter 802. Gray stood at the back of the group as they advanced forward. He didn't want to draw any attention to himself. When the group got to where the gate to the capital was located, they attacked immediately. The second they attacked, the young lady who was in charge of the array activated it to ensure that there would be no way any news would be sent to the experts that weren't in the city. The guards at the gate were only in the origin plane, so they were basically useless against these youths. Each of the people present in the group was already in the late stages of the Overlord plane. Other than the 5 who were at the peak of the Overlord plane, 10 were in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane, right were in the 8th stage of the Overlord plane, and the rest were in the 7th stage of the Overlord plane. The array they set outside would ensure that no signals were sent out from the city. They closed the gates to ensure that everyone stayed inside. The array was also solid, this way it would stop anyone that wanted to escape from the encirclement. Gray looked at the lightning cloud above him and shook his hand gently. Tiny particles made from the darkness element flew into the sky, spreading in the entire city. Due to the size of the city, it was impossible for him to use it to poison everyone. That was never his plan in the first place. He had done a few types of research on the Horned race and surprisingly, he noticed they were weak against the darkness element. Once it manages to get into their body, it would be able to cause great harm to them. It would decrease their fighting capabilities first off. Presently, this was what Gray wanted. Since he was part of the group, he naturally had to make sure things went smoothly. Void had already mapped out all the places that had humans as either slaves or captives. Not just that, but there were also a few places where he sensed treasures. Gray planned on visiting those places while the others saved the humans there. The moment the group entered the city, they spread into groups of 3. Gray didn't group up with anyone. He preferred moving alone. He wasn't the only one who moved alone, all those at the peak of the Overlord plane did the same. Each group had at least one 9th stage Overlord plane elementalist, and a distress signal to alert the others in case they encountered a situation they couldn't deal with. Gray's target was none other than the treasures Void sensed, and unsurprisingly, it was in the center of the city. The place where the largest building was located. While he was rushing there, he noticed powerful auras rushing from different parts of the city and heading in the direction of the city gate. He could already hear the sounds of battles ongoing in different places. He made sure to evade all of them. It would be best if he could get to the building without being noticed. Unfortunately, things never go to plan. A young Horned man blocked his path. The Horned man had 2 colored horns, and even his eyes were 2 different colors. He was already at the peak of the Overlord plane. I can't go unnoticed, huh? Gray looked at the Horned man before him with a cold gaze. sswove.co. I never expected your kind would fight back. The Horned man said in a cool and collected manner. It was like he didn't think of Gray as an opponent. Gray didn't even bother to speak. With a wave of his hand, he sent a fireball at the young Horned man. The Horned man snorted coldly before summoning a large bird made of ice. The bird looked so lifelike that it had Gray a little surprised. The bird screeched before charging at Gray's fireball. It collided with the fireball and shot past it as if it didn't even exist. Gray's fire element was his strongest element, so the fact that this bird could ignore the attack showed how powerful it was. He didn't feel any sense of pressure from it, rather, a smirk appeared on his face. Just as the bird was within a few meters of him, it opened its mouth and spat out an icy wind in Gray's direction. An earth wall appeared in front of Gray, easily blocking the icy wind. The strength of Gray's earth defense was on another level presently. The bird didn't stop its attack there. Ice shards appeared on its large feathers as they shot at Gray. The ice shards continuously slammed into the earth wall, but it stood steadfast. A light flashed through the eyes of the horned man, and a lightning bolt struck the earth wall. The wall shook and cracks started to appear on it. The ice bird continued its attack, and the wall finally broke down. The bird charged past the wall, hoping to use its sharp ice claws to slash Gray. Gray chuckled and his eyes glowed with a mysterious light. The ice bird, which was flying in his direction, suddenly slammed into the ground when it got within 5 meters of Gray. The sudden change in gravity took it unaware, and before it could even react, it was shattered. Nice. Gray was pleased with the result of his test. This was the first time he was using his newly acquired power, and it was quite impressive. He charged at the young horned man, but to his surprise, the horned man retreated, not wanting to engage in a physical battle with him. The horned man continued attacking with his elements alone. Gray evaded and countered as their battle raged on. The capital city of the horned race was thrown into chaos, with explosions ringing out from different locations as a result of the battles going on. The children and the weak all rushed to hide so they wouldn't be caught in the battle. This was a battle that even those in the early stages of the Overlord plane would be able to impact, much less people that weren't even in the Overlord plane. Chapter 803. Boom! The battles in the city raged on. On the side of the 4-peak Overlord plane geniuses who entered the city, they were engaged in a tough battle with multiple opponents. Luckily, no one at the peak had attacked them yet. Of all the people present, Gray was the only one fighting against a peak Overlord plane elementalist. As his battle with his opponent raged on, more horned men rushed over, all in the mid-stages of the Overlord plane. These guys are going to lose a lot of fighters. Void commented from the side as he watched the battle from a rooftop. He was swinging his tail from left to right, not bothered with the fact that Gray was outnumbered. When Gray saw over 50 people rushing toward him, he couldn't help but curse his bad luck. Opening both arms, multiple inscriptions appeared in the sky. The reason he preferred using 2 or 3 inscriptions when fighting was because he could maximize the strength of his attacks then. But with over 5 inscriptions, the strength of each attack would reduce significantly. Had no choice in a situation like this. Being the only person who was heading towards the palace, he was bound to attract all the attention in the city. He didn't feel bothered by so many people rushing toward him. His hair blew in the wind as he rushed into the crowd of horned men. His physical strength was on the 8th stage of the Overlord plane as well. If he reinforced it with his elements, then his attack power would be a force to be reckoned with. What made things even better was that with that light element, he could heal from all the hits he would eventually take while fighting against these people. Gray's figure moved like a shadow within the crowd while his inscriptions attacked as well. He threw blows, used his legs, even headbutted one of the men who got too close to him. The young horned man at the peak of the Overlord plane marveled at the performance of Gray and was forced to rush in as well. He initially wanted to watch the crowd overpower Gray, but he knew from the way things were going that they wouldn't even be able to cause him any harm, much less overpower him. Gray was hit while fighting against the crowd, but his light element was in full throttle as it worked to heal all the places he was hit while he fought. In 2 minutes, Gray had taken out over 35% of the crowd. The young horned man's intervention in the battle slowed him down since he knew he couldn't neglect the attacks of the young horned man. While fighting, he had been utilizing the gravitational force field. This had helped in putting his opponents off. He would disappear from a spot, and when he appeared in another location, he would immediately increase the gravity. Even for these people from the horned race who were used to such gravitational powers, the sudden change still affected them. Gray also utilized his space element, manipulating it to the extreme. The young horned man managed to force him out of the crowd, and he slammed into a building, destroying the entire building from the crash. Before the crowd could even relax, Gray's figure shot into the sky and he opened both hands. Large boulders covered in powerful blue flames appeared in the sky. Meteor descent. The large boulders fell from the sky, landing on different buildings as well as where the crowd was located. Gray minimized the size of the attack so as not to cause too many collateral damages. He was sure that their battles had already killed a few innocent citizens in this area. Although they weren't humans, it didn't mean that he condoned killing innocent people. The horned men rushed to block the boulders in the sky, as they tried to protect themselves. The young horned man at the peak of the Overlord Plain created a lightning and ice sword and rushed at the boulders, slicing them apart. When they finished dealing with the boulders, Gray's figure vanished from the sky and appeared in their midst. He opened both hands, and a powerful repelling force spread out from the middle where he was standing, pushing everyone away from him. The power of the move was on another level that even the young horned man at the peak of the Overlord Plain didn't dare to take it head-on. He covered himself with ice and tried to block the mysterious repelling force from advancing. Unfortunately, his strength was not enough to stop it from advancing. This attack created a large empty space within a 700 meters radius. Everything and everyone within that range was either wiped out or forced out. The repercussion of such an attack was something that was dreadful. Even the four geniuses at the peak of the Overlord Plain couldn't help but look in the direction of the attack. They sensed it even though they were well over 500 meters away from where the attack ended. The soldiers fighting against them also looked in that direction. Every single individual in the city had their attention in the same direction. The place where the attack originated from. At the center of the rubble, Gray could be seen standing leisurely. He looked a little exhausted after the attack. "I never thought it would be this powerful if I used my entire strength," he muttered as he looked at his hands. This was a powerful attack that scared even him. There was no building left standing around him, they were all in rubbles. He scratched his head awkwardly and looked in a particular direction. The ground shook and a figure crawled out from the ground. It was none other than the young horned man at the peak of the Overlord Plain. His current appearance was a far cry from what he looked like when he arrived. He turned around slowly, looking at the aftermath of Gray's attack. Seeing debris and the dead bodies of the soldiers that attacked Gray, he flew into rage and his horns lit up. "You animal!" Chapter 804. What? You're allowed to kill my kind and I'm not allowed to do the same? Gray looked at the furious young horned man. He's encountered people like this since the start of his cultivation journey. To people like this, he didn't even have an ounce of strength to explain himself or any of his actions. "No, you're not," the young man said through gritted teeth and attacked Gray. There was a significant boost in the strength of the young man. Evidently, the glowing of his horns seemed to improve his strength. Gray couldn't be bothered with the strength the young horned man was displaying. "I hate hypocrites the most." His eyes went cold and he vanished. When he appeared, he was standing beside the young horned man. The horned man was already prepared for this and he attacked with his lightning element. However, he felt the air grow heavier and he fell from the sky, heading to the ground. Just as his figure hit the ground, he felt an intense heat. Looking around, all he could see was a sea of blue flames. Gray unleashed his domain. Even though he planned to keep it till the end, he wanted to kill this young horned man so badly that he didn't even care about it. Besides, it wasn't as if there were others here in the first place. The horned man covered himself with ice in hopes to shield himself from the fire. Unfortunately, once caught in this inferno, very few in the Overlord Plain would be able to escape from it alive. Gray watched as the ice melted away and the young man tried all he could to escape, but he was unable to leave the range of the domain. He shrieked in pain as his eyes turned red. All he could see at this point was his death. He was just about to beat Gray up for killing people of his race. Now, he was about to be killed by the same person he thought he would beat up. "Damn it! I'll take you down with me!" he roared and his horns glowed even brighter. Gray knew he was about to explode all the essence in his horns. "Futile efforts," he muttered. He looked around and saw one of the soldiers that managed to survive his attack and switched places with him. The young man had already initiated the self-destruct, so even after Gray was nowhere to be seen, he was still unable to stop it. No. He dragged his horns, trying to rip them off. He noticed that the second Gray left, the flaming inferno he was caged in faded off. This meant that he still had a chance to survive. Sadly, he had already initiated the self-destruct in hopes of taking Gray with him. He looked at Gray, and the last thing he saw before dying was Gray's smiling face as he waved him goodbye. Gray looked on as a large explosion rang out. The effect of the explosion was almost on the same level as Gray's last attack. Being prepared for it, Gray was able to easily deal with the attack. When the explosion died down, the earth wall around him fell to the ground. Not bad. I guess the horns in my possession have another use. He chuckled before he continued moving forward. He knew this wouldn't be the last battle he would have to fight since more opponents would be coming. But he wasn't afraid. As long as he didn't face someone in the Sage Plane, he felt confident in his abilities. If his opponent was too powerful, he would enter the fusion state and beat the crap out of the person. The second explosion from Gray's side of the battle stunned everyone. It hadn't even been more than 2 minutes since the first explosion, yet there was a second explosion almost on the same level. Who headed in that direction? Gil looked in that direction curiously. He had already defeated all the people in front of him, and the cages in front of him were destroyed. The place he was standing looked like an arena. This was one of the places where humans were forced to fight for their lives against beasts, or even each other. Gil told the men to join them in their plan to rescue all the people that were captured in the capital. The rescued people had no option other than to agree. The reason for this was that most of them held deep-seated hatred for the Horned race. A few of them had been here for over 50 years, fighting for survival frequently. After being put through such difficult situations, all they wanted to do was to rip the people from the Horned race apart. Gil nodded and rushed in another direction. He was curious as to who went in that direction, but he didn't change their plans. The leader of the group gave him orders, and he wanted to carry them out. Thinking about all the people that were given orders, his mind went to a particular figure, Gray. He was the only one who was given the freedom to move as he pleased. The chances that Gray was the one behind all the ruckus were very high. He wasn't the only one with this thought, the others felt the same as well. They were each given an area to deal with. And none of those places had anything to do with the center of the city. They were told to meet at the center of the city after they were done with their objectives. The reason they spread out was so as to ensure that the forces of the Horned race would have to separate as well. They were at a disadvantage when it came to numbers. Minimizing their strength was the best thing they could do. The upheaval Gray caused at the center of the city helped them even more since everyone from the Horned race was rushing in that direction, giving the others the freedom to act more quickly. In fact, Gray was unconsciously making the mission easier than they expected. Chapter 805. Boom! Gray continued his onward movement, not fazed by anything that tried to block his path. He hadn't fought against any other peak overlord plane elementalists, but he had defeated countless people from the Horned race who tried to stop him. When he was around 1,000 meters or so from the palace, he felt the gravity suddenly increase. I see, they planned an ambush. Unfortunately, you're not the only ones who can play with gravity. He smirked internally and tried to fight gravity with gravity. He sensed friction in space when he sent out his gravitational force field. Luckily, the force field was on a small scale, so the friction wasn't that high. I see. He squinted his eyes. The situation was a little dangerous, but he managed to escape from any problems. The clash of two opposing gravitational force fields was something that even the tough space here was almost unable to handle. PDA Envil Gray acted as if he was impeded by the force field and stopped advancing momentarily. He only continued after much difficulty. Everyone could sense that his movement isn't as easy as it previously was. When those from the Horned race saw this, they sighed in relief. Gray had been a huge problem for them. Even though they were well aware that there were others in different parts of the city, none of them had caused as much damage as Gray had done. Gray didn't fly because he was also using the opportunity to monitor things. Void told him there were 2 peak overlord plane elementalists hiding in wait. Not just that, but there are over 5 in the palace. If he rushed inside the palace, he risked doing all the tough tasks in this raid. This wasn't how he planned it from the start. Void, you'll deal with one while I deal with the other one, he said to Void, who was nowhere to be seen. Got it. Void's voice echoed in his head. Gray didn't head in the direction of the Peak Overlord Plane Horned race member. Instead, he focused on the multiple Horned men rushing at him. The soldiers numbered in hundreds, and he was sure this was not all. If he fought against them all, he would be exhausted. You guys gave me a powerful weapon and think I won't use it. An evil grin appeared on Gray's face as he rushed into the crowd. When he got into the crowd, a breathtaking scene followed soon after. Wherever Gray passed, the Horned man would scream in pain and burst apart. Gray didn't forget to grab the horns before they were destroyed as well. The fact that this could cause friction in space was already evidence enough to show how powerful it was. Now that he was using it as a means of attack, these people wouldn't be able to even defend against it, much less survive it. The soldiers started to retreat in fear. All they heard were screams from their comrades wherever Gray passed through. It was as if Gray was a death god. What made things worse was that they didn't see him attacking, yet he was killing those close to him. All those he had killed were still in the mid-stages of the Overlord plane. When he got close to where those in the late stages of the Overlord plane were, they noticed the anomaly. He's using gravity against us. Break the formation. One of the men in the Horned race screamed before his head burst apart. They gave Gray a deadly weapon, and he was using it to full effect. If not for the fact that this man was able to sense it, then the others wouldn't know what killed them. Hearing the scream of the man before he died, those who created the formation couldn't help but exchange glances. This was something they hadn't heard of before, so they found it quite difficult to believe. A few felt the man yelled this because he was on the verge of dying and wasn't thinking properly. It was only after 10 more late-stage Overlord plane elementalists who managed to survive long before dying yelled the same thing did they finally believe it. Even the 2 Peak Overlord plane elementalists in the group were stunned. Other than using the effect of the gravitational force field as a means of slowing and weakening their opponents, they had never seen any other way of using it to attack. Yet, Gray was using it so easily. They hastily broke the formation, and when Gray got to where the next Horned man was, the man fell to the ground from the sudden powerful gravitational force field around Gray. This opened the eyes of all those watching. He made a force field around him. Doesn't that mean that both are clashing all this while? One of the men that made the formation asked. This is what he had been using to kill our people. Such an evil individual, he shouldn't be allowed to live past today. One of the 2 Peak Overlord plane Horned men said through gritted teeth. In the history of the Horned race, Gray was probably the only person who had killed the highest number of their people with their own technique. What was worse was that they had a hand in helping him in his actions. The thought alone infuriated all those that made up the formation. They figured it out already? A shame, I was already getting the hang of this. Gray shook his head as he looked at the Horned men that were on the ground around him. Multiple black orbs appeared on his palm that rotated before each heading for a Horned man. The Horned men could only watch as the orb touched them. The second it touched them, those watching saw their comrades disappearing from view as if they were never there. Gray was a frightening figure, and he killed without even blinking. This was what scared the members of the Horned race even more. His methods of killing were numerous. Is he part of the same humans we have been capturing for years now? This was the thought that entered the head of almost every single member of the Horned race as they watched Gray's horrifying methods. Chapter 806. Gray stood in the middle of multiple Horned soldiers, but none of them dared to get close to him. A smile appeared on his face as he took a step forward. He realized that these guys were already too scared to even block his path any longer. Move aside, you will only die if you try blocking my path, he stated calmly. He didn't seem like someone who was in another realm, encircled by people from another race. Rather, he looked like someone who was taking a stroll in his backyard. This was one of the things that the soldiers found annoying. Unfortunately, they knew they were no match for him. What Gray did with the gravity already terrified them. Seeing how he made those Horned men vanish made things worse. Unknown to them, all Gray did was to use the logic from the wind element. If two opposing forces spinned in different directions, it would form something like a crater where they meet. He noticed this when he tried to use his gravitational force field against the one those from the Horned race created. When he sensed the potential of the skill, he hid from the powerful figures. Only after killing many Horned men did they finally find out. Now, with the gravitational field around him, anyone who got within 5 meters of him would feel a powerful pressure that would force them to the ground. This was the reason all these soldiers stared at him but didn't attack. While Gray was moving forward, he saw a figure standing in front of his path. "Your journey ends here," the Horned man said coldly. He was in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane, and Gray could tell his strength was well above ordinary people at the 9th stage. "I can say the same for you," Gray replied. The Horned man gave a nod, and all the soldiers beside him created a space for them to engage in battle. SS. The general would teach him who's boss. Once the general beats him up, we will have the fun of tearing him piece by piece. Some of the soldiers engaged in a battle. Gray overheard them, but didn't feel much from it. He had defeated a genius at the peak of the Overlord plane, so he didn't feel threatened by someone who still hadn't even entered the peak of the Overlord plane yet. When the general saw Gray's calm expression, he took a step forward and entered the 5 meters mark. He didn't flinch even after the pressure descended on him. Gray was a little taken aback, but he didn't feel pressured. He didn't underestimate the Horned man. Even though he was confident he would beat him, he still didn't underestimate him. The man charged at him after getting accustomed to the pressure. Gray blocked the attack of the Horned man, but he was pushed back from the first blow. He shook off the slight discomfort he felt in his hands and continued his fight with the Horned man. They engaged purely in a fist fight, and Gray finally started to understand that a well-trained general of an army shouldn't be compared to a genius. The general's skill and decision-making in battle were well ahead of Gray's. Even though Gray had superior elemental power, the general was more technical. Gray was forced to start using his elemental powers just after 2 minutes of constant battle. He was on the back foot all through the time. The general attacked sensibly, not giving Gray the chance he wanted to use his flashy moves. While Gray was still having difficulties dealing with him, the general brought out a weapon. A spear that had 5 different colors: blue, red, brown, silver, and black. Gray felt genuine pressure from the sword. "Hey, take the spear, it's good." Void's voice echoed in his head. "I can tell." Gray brought out one of the elemental weapons he had in his storage ring. He engaged in combat with the general, and he wasn't able to take the advantage. However, he wasn't at a disadvantage as well. He fought sensibly now and gave the general very little opportunities to hit him. The duo paused after fighting for over 5 minutes. "You're a powerful opponent, I must give you that," the general commented and looked at Gray in a new light. "I can say the same for you. You're not on the same level as those geniuses from your race I've fought against," Gray replied. "Sadly, everything has an end. This will be the end of you. I hope you lived a good life till now," the general said and took an attacking pose with the spear stretched in front of him, aiming at Gray. "I've been living a good life, and I will continue living a good life." Gray held his sword and prepared to attack as well. Both parties looked at each other and vanished from their spots. All those in a lower stage saw was a bright light flashing. A minute later, Gray and the general's figure stopped moving and they stared at each other. "Goodbye," Gray said and kept his sword. Even though the general was powerful, against Gray's array of elements, he still fell in the end. Gray walked over to him and tapped him on the shoulder. "I will take this now. You don't know how to fully utilize it." He took the spear from the hands of the general, who stood still, not able to move. His eyes were placed on Gray's figure. He tried to speak and blood came out of his mouth. "Let me show you the magnificent power of this spear of yours before you pass on." Gray held the spear in the sky and an orb started to appear on the tip. The orb had 5 colors, identical to the one around the spear. All those from the Horned race sensed a powerful energy converging on the tip of the general's spear, and they couldn't help but look at Gray. This was an attack the general had only been able to use once in battle, yet Gray was using it with such freedom. Disappear. Chapter 807. Disappear. Right after Gray's voice died down, a large explosion followed suit. The orb sitting at the tip of the spear shone with a bright light before spreading out in all directions. Fast, stop it! The Peak Overlord Plane Horned Man by the side yelled and jumped out from where he was hiding. He wasn't the only one who came out. 3 more Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men jumped out as well as they tried to contain the explosion. If they allowed this explosion to happen, then at least 80% of the soldiers left alive would die. Not just that, but the destruction that would happen was too large. Gray had already destroyed some parts of the city. This explosion was going to have a larger impact compared to the last one. All 4 Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men joined hands together to stop the explosion. After expending most of their strength, they managed to contain it. That's nice. I wonder how you plan to deal with the second one, Gray said with a slight smile on his face. The 4 men looked at each other horrified when they saw a second orb on the tip of the spear. Their pupils shrunk. Run! They turned to the soldiers and fled as well. They could protect themselves, but they couldn't protect those soldiers. Luckily, they started evacuating the citizens to a protected area close to the palace. Even though not everyone had moved yet, the casualties wouldn't be too high. Gray flew into the sky and looked on as the second orb exploded. The first orb, which was contained by the Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men, escaped and exploded as well. With both explosions combining, the effect would be almost double what one would cause. This explosion drew the attention of everyone once again. The 4 youths at the peak of the Overlord Plane looked in that direction once again. What the hell is going on? The leader of the group was stunned. It hadn't even been up to 10 minutes since the last explosion, yet a larger one had happened. He knew for a fact that Gray was the only one who went in that direction, but he never expected him to cause this much of a ruckus. While they were trying to rescue all the humans, Gray was causing havoc in the city. They didn't know if they should be happy since this drew all the attention of the top Horned Men to him, leaving them to carry out their mission peacefully, or they should be worried since the explosions are bound to harm the humans that were in that area. Gray naturally didn't care about all this. All that mattered to him was getting the treasure inside the palace. Even if he had to tear this place apart piece by piece, he would. Well, unless the experts that weren't in the capital rushed over, then he would escape without a second thought. Once he was done with this mission, his target was leaving this place. He was sure that was the plan of the 5 geniuses as well. They couldn't rescue every human here since they didn't even know how big this place was. From the map Gray had, he knew this place was by no means small. It was even bigger than the Azure continent with multiple cities. The only reason they appeared this close to the capital was all because where the portal appeared was not too far from the capital. This should show more of an effect, Gray thought as he looked at the explosion. He added the darkness element into the orb to ensure once it exploded, it would send out darkness particles across the place. Given the size of the place, the first one barely showed its effect. Once he added this to it, then the effect would be seen more clearly. As long as these Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men were weakened by a bit, then he wouldn't have to fear them. They would still be a problem, but at least it wouldn't be too much for him to handle. A minute later, the explosion died down and the Horned Men rushed back. "You evil thing, I will kill you personally," one of the men said. The man had red horns which indicated the fire element. "Fiery," Gray commented casually. He didn't feel pressured by the men. He knew they were all slowly getting weaker, so he didn't have to fear them. The Horned Men rushed at him, not giving him any chance to think. Gray smirked and his figure blinked. When he appeared again, he was standing between 2 of the Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men. In his previous spot was the Horned Man that was standing where he was currently standing. The second he appeared, he attacked, sending the 2 Horned Men flying. They never expected this, but they still reacted accordingly. They hurriedly tried to block the attack, but it still sent them flying. Gray rushed after them as he tried to take one of them out before the others would be able to join in on the battle. Unfortunately, the Red Horned Man rushed over and blocked him. "You slippery brat, I will kill you." The man yelled and attacked. Gray didn't panic as he blocked the attack that the man sent his way. They noticed that he preferred elemental attacks, so they did the same as well. The battle flared quickly and Gray was crowded by all 4 men. The men were well organized, and after fighting with each other for so long, they understood each other perfectly. Gray was placed at a disadvantage, and he couldn't even block their attacks perfectly. This is them in a weakened state? How powerful will they be in their full strength? He was stunned. The Horned men were stronger than he predicted. It was just like when he was fighting against the general. Even though he was confident in his abilities, he never thought that the general would be that powerful. It was only after exchanging blows with him did he know that he was powerful. "Void, I thought you were supposed to deal with one of them?" Gray couldn't help but ask. "I did, he's here, unable to leave. Guess a few of them hid too well," Void replied. Gray was forced to continue fighting against the 4 men. He slowly started to emit darkness particles to ensure that they started to grow weaker as time went on. Bang! Gray slammed into the ground after receiving an attack from one of the men. The Red Horned man was the one who was attacking aggressively. It was almost as if he wanted to ensure that Gray died. "Damn it! These people are too troublesome," Gray complained. He created a fusion orb that exploded when the men came close to him. The strength of the attack pushed them back as they tried to attack him. Gray rushed at the man who was weaker amongst the 4 of them and started bombarding him with attacks. When he saw the others coming his way, he sent out a second fusion orb that pushed them back. The Horned men knew his plan, so they tried to ensure that he wouldn't be able to kill the man he picked. If Gray succeeded, then he would take out all the others as well. 5 minutes later. Bang! One of the Horned men slammed into the ground. It was surprisingly the Red Horned man. Gray was able to target him and hit him with a powerful attack. The Red Horned man started to bleed as the attack hit him. They're getting weaker. Gray noticed a change. Previously, he wouldn't have been able to hit them with this attack, but this time, he managed to break through his defense and hit him solidly. "You still think you can defeat me?" Gray looked at the Red Horned man and threw a fusion orb at him. The benefit of the fusion orb was that he could use it as much as he wanted to. His essence capacity was too high, so even if he used the attack continuously for hours, he wouldn't run out of elemental essence. The Red Horned man watched on as the orb got to his body. Just as it was about to explode, another Horned man appeared. This man was older with wrinkles on his body. His hair was white and his beard was long, almost on his chest. "Kid, you're powerful, I will give you that. But you're not on our level. If not for your ingenious plan, you wouldn't have been able to even hit them," the old man said with both hands behind him. "I don't know what you're saying," Gray replied with a calm face. "You're smart, but attacking this place was your biggest mistake," the old man said. Gray looked at the man but didn't say anything. He could feel some sort of pressure from the man. This man was not ordinary. Chapter 808. Gray looked on as the old man dealt with the fusion orb easily. It was as if the orb wasn't even a challenge for him. The darkness element. No wonder he noticed what I did, he thought to himself. The old man looked at Gray with a calm expression. He wasn't bothered by him. With a tap, the Red Horned man that was on the ground started to heal up. He has the light element as well. Gray's eyes narrowed as he looked at the old Horned man. Only after seeing this did he take his time to look at his horns. Now he understood why he missed the horn. They were very small. Compared to the horns of others, this old man's horn was very small. "Kid, I'll let you live if you agree to give us your elemental core. This is a good deal for you since you get to keep your life," the old man said. To him, he was already being lenient with Gray. Given the number of people Gray had killed, he was supposed to be executed in front of the entire kingdom, but since he could tell that Gray was extremely talented, he wanted his core. "Actually, I can say the same for you," Remove your horns, and you just might not get to feel the pain when I do it myself." Gray smiled. This old man might be powerful, but he was still in the Overlord plane. Only someone in the Sage plane can threaten him at this moment, and unfortunately for the Horned race, there was no one in said plane. "Don't underestimate me, kid, I'm not someone you can deal with." The old man didn't feel annoyed with Gray's statement. He also knew that their horns were valuable to people from other races. It was just like the way they were capturing humans for their cause. "You might be powerful, but you're not enough to threaten me." Gray's eyes went cold. "Void, deal with him. And make it quick," he said to Void telepathically. Void quickly killed the Overlord plane Horned man he kept captive and appeared behind the old man. The old man sensed the vibration in the space behind him and turned around to attack. He knew Gray had the space element, so he felt Gray was trying to attack him from behind. He threw a fist in that direction, but what he met was a large claw that sent him flying. Void's current size was well over 2 meters in length and over 1 meter tall. He wasn't like the cute little cat he always portrayed anymore. Gray attacked the red Horned man with the opportunity that presented itself from Void's attack. His fusion orb struck the red Horned man, who was still in the midst of recovery after the old man healed him. The other 3 Horned men rushed over to block Gray. But he used his inscriptions to ward them off and focused on dealing with the red Horned man. The old man was infuriated by Gray's complete disregard for him and tried to get involved in the battle. However, he was blocked by Void. "Get out of my way!" He threw a palm that was covered with a black light in Void's direction. Void opened his mouth and spat out a fireball that crashed with the palm and destroyed the black light. Void's strength was not something the old man could take lightly. When he realized this, he knew that there was no hope for him to be able to intervene in the battle. What was worse was that he hadn't cleansed the other Horned men who were fighting with Gray. He only cleansed the red Horned man since he was the one closest to him. "You impudent creature, I'll skin you in the presence of your master," the old man stated coldly and attacked Void. "He's not my master," Void replied and vanished. He appeared behind the man and attacked. The old man was able to block the attack, but he was pushed back by the attack. Void and the old man continued exchanging blows while Gray focused on the red Horned man. With the weakening of the 3 Horned men at the peak of the Overlord plane, they found it difficult to fight against the inscriptions. Gray created 6 inscriptions to ensure that the attacks on the Horned men will be sufficient to stop them. Nonetheless, they still managed to stop him from killing the red Horned man. They were, after all, at the peak of the Overlord plane, and they were very experienced fighters. The battle raged on with Gray fighting against 4 opponents while Void was dealing with the old man. The few soldiers who returned could only watch from the side. If they tried to get involved, they would only make things difficult for their superiors. They couldn't even make use of their famed formation since Gray would just counter it with his own, putting their superiors in danger in the process. Although Gray had the upper hand, he still got hit a few times by his opponents. It couldn't be helped, they were very powerful. Just when the 4 were starting to feel they still had a chance, a change occurred on Void's side of the battle. The old man who was being pushed back by Void suddenly froze, unable to dodge Void's claw attack. The claw hit him solidly on the chest and he slammed to the ground. Before he could even move once again, Void appeared almost at the same time he slammed into the ground and continued his vicious assault. Seeing the old man in trouble, the 4 Horned men discarded their battle with Gray and rushed in that direction. When they were 20 meters away from Void, they felt a powerful repulsion that pushed them back. Gray appeared behind one of the Horned men, and the spear he took from the general pierced through his chest. "You should focus on your battle," Gray whispered in the ears of the Horned man. He knew Void had used his domain, so he was more or less certain that the 4 Horned men wouldn't be able to get close to Void. He quickly capitalized on the situation and injured one of them. Chapter 809. Twisting the spear, Gray removed the spear, and just as it got to the tip, it exploded out, destroying the body of the man to bits. The 3 Horned men were stunned when they saw this. Void was assaulting the old horned man, while Grey on the other hand didn't spare the opportunity presented to him. The three horned men were forced to fight against him since there was no way to get to Void. Their plan was to apprehend Grey and use him as a bargaining chip. They could tell that Void was here because of Grey, so if he saw Grey captured, he would most definitely let the old horned man go. They fought desperately, but Grey held his own against them. His inscription and the space element made it difficult for the horned men to surround him. While they were still fighting, they heard a scream coming from where Void and the old man were fighting. Looking in that direction, they saw Void plucking out the horns of the old man. It was just like Grey said, if the old man didn't offer up his horns by himself, then he would have to go through the pains of watching them being plucked out. Void didn't go easy on him as he removed the horns either. In the most ruthless and savage way, he removed the horns. The shrieks of the old man sent chills down the spines of every horned man present. Every member of the horned race would never want to experience this event. Removing the horns of a member of the horned race was not only a sign of embarrassment, it was the most gruesome thing that could happen to them. Grey didn't really care about all this, and neither did Void. He removed the horns and moved them in the face of the old man. The man held his face as he screamed in pain. He could feel his strength slowly receding. Their essence was stored in their horns, so losing it meant that they would gradually lose their strength. It was evident from the second the horns were removed. "Now, die," Void said coldly, and the space around the old man started to distort. It was his special space attack. The old man tried to fight against it, but he was already beaten by Void, adding the fact that his horns were ripped off, and his strength was not even close to someone in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane. He could only watch on as his body disintegrated into nothing. Grey was the more focused fighter on his side. The death of the old man alarmed the three horned men he was fighting. They were unable to fight properly, which gave him the chance to fight without pressure. "What are you all doing? Attack them!" The red horned man was forced to call on the strength of the soldiers. They couldn't fight like this, especially with Void watching from the side. The soldiers nodded and rushed into the scene. Grey was forced to divide his attention to the soldiers. Void also joined in on the battle as well. Boom! Bang! Bam! The explosions from the attacks were massive, and as time passed, more and more soldiers started to flood the place. Grey might be powerful when fighting against a large crowd, but thousands of people were a little too much for him, especially when there are hundreds of 9th stage Overlord plane elementalists and over 10 at the peak of the Overlord plane. The three horned men at the peak of the Overlord plane managed to call over more people at the peak. Even though they were not on their level, they could still hold Grey and Void back. "Grey, they're too much. Should we retreat?" Void asked. The numbers were increasing as time went on. It was as if the soldiers were infinite. Grey assessed the situation, and after realizing that it would be impossible for him to advance any further, he decided it was best for them to retreat. He was almost certain that his involvement had dragged all the powerful figures to this part of the city. He knew from the start that if he created a large scene, this would happen. "Well, I've got a good number of horns, let's retreat then," Grey said, and turned around decisively. He wasn't someone who would risk his life for a treasure. Besides, if not for the leader of the geniuses who wanted his help, he wouldn't have come here in the first place. The battles he fought here had taught him a few things, so he was satisfied. When the horned men noticed that he was escaping, they were infuriated. Grey wanted to leave like that after what he did to them. Impossible. At the peak of the Overlord plane chased after him with everything they had. "They're chasing us," Void said when he saw them. "Guess it's time to give them some parting gifts." Grey smiled, and 2 horns appeared in his hands. These were horns he took from the people of the horned race. After playing with it for a while, he threw them in the direction of the horned men chasing him. "Insolence!" The red horned man yelled in annoyance. If he had the chance, he would rip Grey to pieces. This was the first time he was seeing someone attack them with their horns. What was worse was that they knew how powerful an explosion from the horns would cause. Just looking at the horn showed that it was taken from a late-stage Overlord plane elementalists. The horns exploded, but the horned men were already out of its range. This action made them want to capture Grey all the more. Grey, noticing that they dodged the first one, smiled. "I can play all day." With that, he brought out another pair of horns and tossed them at the horned men chasing after him. The horned men were red from anger. They had never been this angry in their lives. Grey was throwing horns at them, horns from their race. Most of the horns were from the soldiers Grey killed not too long ago. They noticed him taking the horns, but they couldn't stop him. Chapter 8:10. Grey and Void rushed through the city, heading for the exit. He had been going in circles trying to stall for time for the others, but he felt he had already done enough. They had been in the city for over 30 minutes now. If the others still hadn't completed their mission, it had nothing to do with him. If they still couldn't easily rescue the humans after he dragged out all the top experts in the city, then they were incompetent and slow. While Grey was escaping, he saw Gil and the leader of the group heading in his direction. "Done?" he asked. The duo nodded. "Thanks to you, things were smoother than we planned," the leader of the group replied. "Nice." Grey didn't stop while speaking to them. He rushed past them and continued heading in the direction of the exit of the city. Gil and the leader of the group wanted to ask what was wrong, but after sensing the infuriated roars from the horned men chasing after Grey, they decided it was best to run away for now. The auras they were sensing were not something they could deal with, especially given the number of people rushing there. They turned in Grey's direction, fleeing as well. "Duck!" Grey's voice came from ahead of them. A confused look appeared on their faces, but seeing the shining horns that were coming their way, they didn't need anyone to tell them what to do. The horns exploded in front of the horned men chasing after them, sending the horned men into rage once again. "Ah! I'll kill you all!" the red horned man yelled. He was literally on the verge of going mad. Grey was insulting them with his antics. What was worse was that Grey had been going in circles, trying to buy time for the others, and he had also expended tons of horns in a bid to slow the horned men down. "Isn't that one of the horns of those guys?" Gil asked as they caught up to Grey. "Yap, it's quite handy, don't you think?" Grey took out another one and with a chuckle, he tossed it in the direction of the horned men chasing after him. Gil and the leader of the group exchanged glances. They didn't think Grey would use the horns for such purposes. The thought of even taking the horns didn't even cross their minds, yet Grey not only took it, he even started to use it as a form of attack. "No wonder those guys are upset," the leader of the group said with a knowing look on his face. Gil laughed and rushed after Grey. He was just about to beg him for some horns when he saw some horned men fighting with the youths who came with them. The youths were escorting the humans they rescued from the city. He rushed in that direction, leaving Grey and the leader of the group alone. "You should lend a hand, I will be fine," Grey said to the leader of the group. "Thank you, can you keep them busy a little longer?" the leader of the group asked. 2 more minutes, no longer," Grey said to the leader of the group. The leader of the group could only give a wry smile before nodding. "You've been helpful." 2 minutes later. Grey rushed out of the city, with the horned men hot on his trail. The numbers of the peak Overlord plane elementalist had increased to over 20. At this rate, he was sure that over 40% of the peak Overlord plane elementalists in the city were already out. He wanted to say 50%, but he didn't really know how many were left protecting the palace. The formation that they used in blocking the city was easily broken as he fled. The horned men didn't even take a glance at the others since Grey was their main target. The king had ordered for Grey's head since he was the one who killed the highest number of his people. Forgetting the people he killed, just the soldiers alone was enough to cause an issue for any kingdom. "Those guys are coming?" Void said to Grey as escaped. "So quick?" Grey didn't expect the experts that weren't in the city to return so fast. It hadn't even been close to a minute since the array was destroyed, yet they were already here. They must have alerted them some other way. Void said. They didn't know everything about the Horned race, so there might be a way they could communicate with the experts outside the city without them knowing. The brothers were an example, so Void wasn't too surprised they came here so quickly. However, it took a long time since the experts didn't come quickly. Looks like the array only delayed the transmission, but couldn't stop it. Void said to Gray. My thoughts as well. But why are they only focused on me? Gray was still trying to shake off the peak Overlord plane elementalists chasing him, yet more were coming. If not for the fact that he wanted to ensure that the others who came with him on the mission had escaped, he would have been nowhere to be seen. Even without using the fusion state, he could still use the Great Void technique to leave these guys in the dust. 6 hours later. The humans' hideout. Gray walked into the cave only to be welcomed by a large crowd. He looked around before heading in the direction the leader of the group and the other geniuses were located. You made it back. Margaret exclaimed as she saw Gray. Hello. Gray waved at them before looking at the leader of the group. We'll leave in 2 days. The leader of the group knew the reason for Gray's coming. Gray squinted his eyes and looked around, too long. Tomorrow, they should have recovered by then. They are not the issue. Since we will be leaving in such a large group, we have to ensure that we draw as many experts here, to make things easier when leaving. The leader explained. What is your plan? Gray thought about what he said and realized he was making sense. Given their current number, it would take them a long time for everyone to use the portal. And since they couldn't go there twice, they had to ensure that they all used it. Chapter 8:11. 2 days later. Boom! A large explosion sounded out in the southern part of the capital city. Gray's figure appeared standing in the sky as he looked at the large group of Horned men rushing in his direction. He looked at them with a haughty expression. It was as if he was looking down on lesser beings. The Horned men saw Gray's face and the red Horned man's facial expression turned distorted. You again! Don't think you will be able to escape this time. He screamed at Gray and threw an object into the sky. The second the object left his hand, an old man appeared in the sky and a large formation covered the entire city. Let me see how you escape now. The red Horned man laughed. Gray had been tormenting them for the past 2 days now. Every time that they were about to catch him, he would escape from their grasp. They even brought out the faster elementalists in the capital, but none of them had been able to catch up to Gray. Void, gotten it yet? Gray looked at the. Of everyone in the group, he was the fastest, so he was the only one who could cause chaos in the city. According to the plan of the leader of the group, he would distract the experts while they traveled to where the portal was located. Normally, Gray would never agree to something like this since he didn't trust them. But when they were escaping after the mission, Void sensed a treasure entering the capital. It presumed one of the experts who came back brought it to the capital. This was not the only thing that gave him the confidence in taking this task. The main reason was that he made a breakthrough in one of his space element skills, the Great Void technique. Now, he could tag someone, and even when the person was not close to him, he could still appear there. He had experimented with Void and noticed the distance was unbelievable. Even after Void went over 30 kilometers away, he was still able to appear on the spot. The only thing was that with the increase in distance, it became harder. Other than that, they had not seen any other limitations for it. He was sure there were limitations, but he would try to find them later on. Before the group left, he tagged Gil when he shook him. One of the most mysterious things about the mark was that he could tag anyone without them even noticing it. He was sure that the place the portal was located was not any further than 60 kilometers from the capital. Once Void successfully takes the treasure, then he would instantly teleport there. Before these experts rushed there, he would be long gone. I need a little more time. There's a troublesome figure here. Void replied. Even with all the commotion I caused, they still kept the powerful ones there. Herman Gray thought to himself. He was sure that there was something valuable in the palace other than the life of the ruler. However, he wasn't too interested in this. The most important thing to him right now was leaving this place. The Horned Man and the others attacked Grey after they had successfully sealed the place. Grey didn't even try to fight with them. He turned around and fled, dodging the attack slightly. The Horned Men continued chasing him, with the help of an old man. This old Horned Man was on the same level as the one Void killed before they retreated during the raid. He had been the only one who had been able to not only catch up to Grey but even successfully attack him. However, in the final moments before he could apprehend him, he would vanish without a trace. Grey's use of the horns as a weapon was one of the things he hated the most about him. He wasn't even bothered with the fact that Grey had to kill hundreds of his kind to get their horns. While Grey was running away from the old man, Void was entangled with 3 old men in the palace. Even with his domain, these Horned Men were each stronger than the old man he fought the last time. In a large mountain range, a portal could be seen spinning. Around it were multiple Horned Men standing guard. They built a camp close to the portal. This way they would be able to monitor the people who used the portal. Gil and the others were looking at the camp vigilantly. They had been staring for minutes now. "What do we do?" one of the people they rescued asked. "What else can we do?" The leader of the group shrugged before stepping out. While hiding, he had been able to ascertain that there were only 6 Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men in the camp. With their numbers, they could deal with them. The leader of the group was the first to step out, walking confidently into the camp. When the Horned Men noticed him, they were first taken aback, but after a moment of realization, they rushed out to surround him. The 6 Peak Overlord Plane Elementalists all came out as well. They looked at the leader of the group with an annoyed expression. They've all heard of the deaths that occurred in the capital a few days ago, so they naturally hated humans even more now. "Kid, where are your accomplices?" one of the Horned Men at the peak of the Overlord Plane asked coldly. "Look around." The leader of the group spread out his hands and attacked. The others rushed out from the side and joined the attack. With their numbers, they were able to quickly overpower the soldiers. Other than the Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men, the others were on the verge of being subdued. Gil and the others were fighting against the Horned Men at the peak of the Overlord Plane. With the help of 5 9th Stage Overlord Plane's Elementalists, they were on the front foot in the battle. Chapter 8:12. Gil and the group were able to easily subdue all the Horned Men in that area. Given their large numbers, it wasn't a surprise that they did. Even the Peak Overlord Plane Elementalists who were the most difficult to deal with had been defeated. "You all should start going. There should be people on the other side of the portal to protect you. But be prepared for anything just in case," the leader of the group said to the people they rescued. To be safe, he sent 1 Peak Overlord Plane Elementalist to lead the way. "Connor, are we going to have to wait for him?" one of the ladies in the group asked the leader of the group. Connor looked at her. "Of course. Without his help, we wouldn't have been able to easily rescue these people, nor would we have been able to get to this place. Besides, he's not here because he's trying to ensure we don't face any issues when leaving." When they were fighting against the Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men, they suddenly realized that had their numbers been many, then they wouldn't have been able to even breach this place, much less escape. These Horned Men at the peak of the Overlord Plane were very difficult to deal with, even for them. They couldn't help but wonder how Grey had been dealing with them for the past 2 days. "I know, I just wanted to confirm if we have to wait for him, even if more experts come," the young lady said. We'll have to wait till then, but for now, we're waiting. With his speed, he would get here in a few minutes," Connor replied before sitting down. The people they rescued were already gradually using the portal and teleporting to the Aurora continent. It would take a while before they left since the people numbered in hundreds. They couldn't flood the portal since there was the fear that it might collapse. On Grey's end, Grey was still fighting with the old men as he ran through the city, ensuring that he was not caught in an encirclement. If he allowed that to happen, then he would have to suffer from being hit. No matter how powerful his body was, it was not indestructible, so he would feel pain when hit. 5 more Peak Overlord Plane Horned Men had joined in on the battle, each on the same level as the old man. With the speed of the first old man, he was able to catch up to him for some time, giving the others the chance to get close to him and attack. Void, aren't you done yet? Grey could barely hold on against these men. Even after using multiple horns, they were still able to not only catch up, but they attacked in a well-coordinated manner, giving him almost zero chances of dodging. More are coming, but I will get it soon, don't worry. Just hang on a little longer. Void's voice resounded in his head. Damn it! Grey couldn't help but complain. Bang! He slammed into the ground after receiving a blow from one of the old men. He tried entangling them in a close-range battle, but their physical prowess was above any of the horned men he had fought against before. After standing up from the rubble, he turned around and fled in the other direction. You think we would let you leave? One of the old men sneered and raised his hand, pointing at Grey. As Grey was fleeing, he felt his body suddenly start to become heavier. Crap! What the hell is this? He was shocked. His speed was reduced by almost 20%. In a chase like this, 20% was a lot. He could barely escape from them in the first place. With his body becoming heavier, it would make things even more difficult. The old man laughed when he saw this. When he punched Grey a few moments ago, he marked him. This mark enabled him to increase the weight of whatever it was on. Just when they thought they finally had Grey, a strange black cat appeared on his shoulder. I'm done. Grey's figure blurred and he vanished without a trace. It's that skill again, he shouldn't be able. The red horned man was on the verge of speaking when he saw the formation they created had a crack on it. He passed through it, just like that? He was dumbfounded. The space tunnel Grey created was something that they couldn't counter since it was completely different from other space tunnels. That direction. The portal. One of the old men looked in the direction where the crack appeared, and without even having to think about it, they knew his destination. Come on, the old man said to the others and rushed in that direction. A few minutes later, the old horned men appeared at the place where the portal was located, and to their anguish, all the horned men that they left there were dead, and their horns had been removed. Grey was the only one who understood the chemistry of their horns, so he was definitely the one who took them. They've also seen him use it multiple times. How could he take care of them in such a short time? One of the men asked as he looked around. The portal was currently shaking, clearly on the verge of collapsing. He baited us, this wasn't something he did alone. Looks like the reason they attacked the city from the start was never because they wanted the humans, they only wanted to draw us out. With the portal they used already destroyed, this was their only hope of leaving. One of the old men replied. Not all of them knew about the appearance of another portal. The horned man clenched his fists in anger. While they were talking, he heard two pieces of news that sent him into rage. The White Desert had been infiltrated, and the next batch of geniuses who were being groomed were all killed. Even the cores that were kept in the storage were destroyed. Not just that, but the palace was also infiltrated, and a large black beast not only killed 3 of the top experts in the kingdom, but he also stole the treasure they acquired not too long ago. Chapter 8:13. The Aurora Continent. Grey looked at the portal once again. He stayed in a strange world for weeks, and he couldn't help but feel his gains were very good. His earth elemental grade saw a huge boost, and he comprehended gravity as well. He also broke through to the 8th stage of the Overlord plane in both his cultivation stage and his physical body. What else could he ask for? Connor walked up to Grey. Thank you for your help, it wouldn't have been this easy without you. It's okay. Grey replied with a smile. Grey spoke with them for some time before leaving. Connor invited him to travel with them, but he refused. His current objective was to get into a faction and cultivate patiently until the time for the battle. Once he enters a faction, getting to the Sage Plane was his first aim. He didn't really care too much about other things. After leaving, he started his journey once again. 3 weeks later, Grey was standing in front of a large gate. A huge crowd were standing outside the building as well, all the youths below 20 years of age with only a few above 20. He heard a top faction was recruiting members, and all they had to do was to challenge someone from the faction. If they won, they would get a chance to join them. The faction was on the decline according to what he heard, but it was still a powerful faction nonetheless. The faction was mass recruiting members, so many youths naturally came to try their luck. The people are too much, it would take forever if they have to fight one by one. Void said. They will most likely change the plans. Gray nodded. While he was speaking with Void, an old man came out to welcome the people who came over for the recruitment program. Seeing the size of the crowd, he couldn't help but chuckle. I see that we still have some appeal. Unfortunately, we naturally can't take in everyone, and with your numbers, the task to get into the faction has changed. The old man told them about their new task. They would be taken a special place where they would have to survive for 1 week. Those who survived would be taken into the faction. There was a side quest that would give them a better position when entering the faction. The place where they would be kept had magical beasts running rampant. The person with the highest number of beast cores and best qualities would get a good position. The thought of endangering themselves just to get into a faction made a few of the people who came for the recruitment have second thoughts. Factions rarely used this method since it caused too many deaths. A few people even gave up immediately and left the place. Not everyone would want to put their lives at risk just to get into a top faction, especially when it was one that was dying. In the blink of an eye, over 30% of the people present left the place. The old man didn't seem fazed by this, it was within his expectations. Anyone else leaving? He asked after noticing no one else was moving. A few more people left the crowd, reducing its size once again. When the old man confirmed that no one else was leaving the crowd, he nodded before addressing those present. The place they would be sent to had different zones, for each of the 3 stages, early, mid, and late stages of the overall and origin plane. The magical beasts in each zone was within said stage. If anyone went to a stage above them and died, it had nothing to do with the faction. Not just that, but if any of them died from the beast's attack, it showed they were not competent. When the crowd heard his words, a few more took a step back. They were all thinking if trying out was a good idea or not. You still have the chance to leave if you want. The man looked at all the people present. Many more people left when they heard this. In no time, the place which was previously crowded with thousands of people had reduced to a bare just over 800 people. The old man looked at those present and nodded. Courageous, each individual will be given a talisman that can help them if they are in danger. The talisman would teleport you out. This will however mean that you have been eliminated from the trial. When the youths heard of the talisman, they couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He wanted to see if those who came are brave. Interesting. Gray thought. This was the 5th faction he had come to since leaving the Horned Race's world. None of them had been able to attract him, so he hadn't joined anyone yet. When he heard about this faction and its history, he was a little interested in it, so he decided to come over and see how the trial would be. At first, he was disappointed when they said all they had to do was to fight against someone from the faction, but with this change, he felt a little intrigued by them. The old man used a simple method to weed out those who weren't brave. If he had said that there was a talisman from the start that would teleport them out of danger, then everyone who came would take part in the trial, but he excluded it, making the youths think they were going to endanger their lives. After the man finished telling them about all the rules, he told them to get into a line for their respective stages. The gates opened up and thick elemental essence sipped out. Gray's expression changed slightly when he sensed this. He never expected that the elemental essence here would be this thick. People dressed the same way came over to lead them into the place. They would be undergoing the trial in the faction grounds. Chapter 8:14. Gray followed the crowd as they entered the faction ground. After entering, he felt just how thick the elemental essence here was. Cultivating in a place like this would boost his speed. With the increase of his elemental grades, he would need a lot of essence to break through. The men in front of them led them to a place that led to a forest. This place was fenced round, and a powerful array was surrounding it. This is probably where they keep the beasts. Gray thought as he looked at the place. After they got to the place, the gate was opened and each person was allowed inside. A talisman was given to them. The men also told them of the rules once again. They didn't forget to advise them to use the talisman whenever they sensed a threat, since there are beasts in the place that had abilities to kill some of them with a single blow. It soon got to Gray's turn and he was given the talisman. After taking the talisman, he stepped into the forest. From the moment he stepped into the place, he heard the roars of beasts coming from deep in the forest. He also sensed the powerful auras of the beasts, however, none of them exceeded the Overlord plane, so he didn't feel too bothered. All he had to do was to survive for 7 days in a place where only Overlord plane magical beasts occupied. He had no problems with staying there for a year, much less 7 days. "What do we do first?" Void asked. "We'll scout the place for now," Gray said as he walked into the forest. Some of the youths who came inside were creating groups with people they were familiar with. There were also some people who formed a group even though they were not familiar with each other. Most of the people who decided to move alone were either in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane or at the peak. Gray and a few others in the 7th stage were the ones who didn't join a group, deciding to move on their own. Time passed by quickly, and before they knew it, a day had passed. Gray was still moving around. The place was quite big, and since he wasn't in any hurry, he took his time. He had avoided all the beasts in his path. As things stand, he was probably the only one who hadn't engaged any beast in a battle since entering the place. While moving, he encountered a young man who was at the peak of the Overlord plane fighting against a beast in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane. "Let's watch," Void suggested. He was bored of just moving, so seeing someone fighting against a beast, he wanted to at least use it as a means of entertainment. Okay. Gray nodded. He knew his presence would alert the young man, so he tried to ensure that he stayed unnoticed. The young man was a dual elementalist, having the fire and water elements. It was a powerful combination, and the young man was good at using the two elements. Gray watched the young man slowly gain the edge in the battle. After almost 5 minutes of gruesome battle, the young man was able to finally kill the beast. He extracted the core and kept it in his storage ring. The body of the beast wasn't too important to him, so he left it lying and continued on his path. Just as he was about to leave, a large panther jumped out from the side, with golden fur. The panther charged at the young man. The young man didn't notice the panther early, so he was hit by the first strike of the panther even though he tried dodging. Luckily, he only got a scratch. The young man looked at the panther and his pupils dilated when he saw the color of the panther. This panther was already at the peak of the Overlord plane, but that was not worried the young man. What he was scared of was the species of the panther. Golden fur panthers are regarded among the top-leveled cats, having a very high bloodline. Their strength was also something to take note of. A golden fur panther can easily defeat a normal panther on the same stage as itself. Presently, this panther was not something this young man could deal with on his own. Without delay, the young man sent out an attack and ran in the other direction. The panther spat out a golden light that destroyed the attack the young man sent his way and rushed after him. Around the body of the panther was a golden hue that made it move faster than normal. A beast with a high bloodline, nice. Gray commented and rushed after the panther. Other than dragons and griffins, this was probably the magical beast with the highest bloodline he had encountered. He wasn't adding Void to this category since Void was a little different. The panther quickly caught up to the young man and started attacking it. From its eyes, Gray discerned that its intelligence was nothing like other magical beasts. This was a trait common in beasts with high bloodlines. They all had improved intelligence, which helped them in surviving. The panther was able to hurt the young man within 2 minutes of attacking. The young man was frightened, and he was already thinking of using the talisman to escape. The only reason he was waiting was because he didn't want to give up so easily, but if he sees there was no hope of escaping from this beast, then he would use it. Gray's figure flashed and he appeared in front of the panther. With a fireball, he forced it back. His appearance startled the panther, but it didn't worry when it sensed Gray's strength. To it, Gray was another victim it would kill in no time. The young man heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Gray and quickly rushed forward. "We can fight it together," he offered. "Don't worry, I'll be fine on my own." You can heal up on the side. Gray turned to look at the young man, but he quickly gazed back at the panther. Chapter 8:15. That's a golden fur panther. I couldn't deal with it on my own, and you think you can? The young man had noticed that Gray was only in the 8th stage of the Overlord plane. This panther was not something that they could take lightly. It was powerful. He was already lucky to be able to fight against it till now. If not for the talisman, he was not certain if he would be able to escape from the panther. I know, don't worry, just watch from the side. If you notice I can't deal with it alone, you're free to join me then. Gray said with a smile. The young man looked at him and retreated. Since Gray wanted to show off, then he would leave him alone. To him, Gray was making a wrong decision since the two of them had a high chance of killing the panther. If only Gray fought against it and was killed by the panther, he would instantly use his talisman to escape. Gray knew the young man didn't feel he could deal with the panther alone. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but chuckle. Although this panther was powerful, it couldn't be compared to those old men from the Horned race that were at the peak of the Overlord plane. This panther's strength should be below them. The panther didn't attack immediately because it thought Gray and the young man would team up. When it saw the young man heading back, it couldn't help but look at Gray as if it was looking at a moron. Its eyes showed it so well even Gray and the young man noticed it. Ha ha, that guy is looking down on you. Void's laughter echoed in Gray's head. A soft smile appeared on Gray's face. It'll regret it soon enough. The panther attacked, hoping to kill Gray in the shortest time possible. Although it found how Gray appeared without its knowledge, it didn't feel Gray was its match. Gray threw a blow at the claw strike of the panther. When the young man saw this, he couldn't help but facepalm. Moron! He brought out the talisman, preparing to use it at a moment's notice. To him, Gray wanted to commit suicide. The next moment, he saw a scene that sent chills down his spine. His mouth opened wide while his eyes nearly bulged out. Gray's fist collided with the panther's claw, and the panther was sent flying. There was a flash of bluish light which indicated the usage of an elemental skill. But the fact that Gray was the one standing while the panther crashed into a tree was something the young man's brain found unbelievable. How? After a moment of silence, this was the only word that came out of the young man's mouth. He looked at the panther that was standing up after breaking through 2 trees from Gray's attack, then he looked at Gray once again. Gray smiled when he saw the increase in his physical strength. He used his fire element to make the impact of the blow heavier, but the result was something that made him proud. His current prowess was on another level. The panther roared and looked at Gray in disbelief. It rushed at him once again. Gray was prepared for it and they started exchanging blows. The panther was quick, but with the help of the space element, Gray was faster. The young man watched in disbelief as Gray was holding his own against the panther. This was the same panther that he couldn't fight against. Just like the panther, he was at the peak of the Overlord plane while Gray was in the 8th stage. Gray hadn't even gotten to the 9th stage yet, but he was already this powerful. Boom! Bam! Bang! Gray and the panther continued fighting, destroying most of the trees around them. When the panther realized it couldn't gain the upper hand, it spat out a golden light from its mouth. Gray dodged the attack, but just barely. Such a strange attack. Gray thought as he sensed the attack. The properties of the attack the panther used were something he had not sensed in other elements before. The battle raged on and the panther realized it was not able to harm Gray. It had hit him a few times, but other than superficial wounds, Gray seemed perfectly fine. Thinking up to this point, it felt a bit of fear and quickly turned around to escape after using an attack to force Gray back. When it started the battle, it didn't think Gray was a match for it, so it didn't really feel any burden when attacking. But now that it realized it might actually be the one who was in danger, it escaped decisively. Gray naturally wouldn't let this beast escape from his grasp. With a blink, he appeared close to the panther, and the gravity in the area increased. The sudden change caught the panther off guard and it fell to the ground. But being a magical beast meant that it had powerful physical abilities. It managed to stand up almost immediately and attacked Gray. Gray blocked the attack and retreated, but he made sure to stay within the region of his gravitational force field. This would help him in slowing down the panther. They continued fighting, destroying the trees around them. Even the hill by the side had suffered from the battle as well. 2 minutes later, Gray stood in front of the golden fur panther, which was panting heavily. It had wounds on its body from Gray's attacks. Gray wasn't free from wounds as well. There was a large claw mark on his back and blood was flowing from it. A magical beast at death's door is truly not to be taken lightly. He thought as he looked at his state. When the panther finally came to terms that Gray was not going to let it leave, it put its life on the line in the battle. Gray was not prepared for this, so the panther managed to wound him, and not on one occasion. Chapter 8:16. Unfortunately, I have to kill it. It will be a nice specimen to study, Gray said to Void as he looked at the golden fur panther. We should try cooking it, its meat would be very nice. Void drooled as he looked at the golden fur panther. If the panther knew Void's plans for it, it would most definitely do all it could to make sure it took Void with it. Fortunately, it couldn't hear what Gray and Void were saying. The young man was standing not too far from them. He was still in a state of shock that Gray was able to defeat the golden fur panther. This was a magical beast with a good bloodline which made it powerful in its stage, yet Gray, who was below it, managed to defeat it. Although he sustained some injuries, it wasn't something that was fatal. He watched on as Gray not only killed the golden fur panther but also extracted the core. To be honest, he couldn't say he didn't want it, but he knew he couldn't defeat the golden fur panther, so he didn't deserve it. You defeated it. He walked up to Gray after Gray kept the corpse of the golden fur panther. I was lucky, Gray replied with a smile. The young man looked at him. He didn't believe Gray's words. This wasn't luck. He watched him beat up the golden fur panther with his 2 eyes, yet Gray was saying it was luck. To him, Gray was either trying to be humble or very proud. He didn't know which of the 2 Gray was trying to be. For someone in the 8th stage, you're quite powerful. He tried to continue the conversation. Gray smiled without replying. He didn't really know what to reply to the young man's statement, so he stayed quiet. Do you mind traveling with me? The young man asked. Although he didn't want a companion, Gray was a powerful individual, so he didn't mind teaming up with him. I'm still surveying the place. If you don't mind traveling with me doing nothing, then okay. Gray replied with a shrug. The young man thought about it for some time and decided to go on his own for now. He still needed to collect beast cores. The thought of traveling with Gray was enticing, but since Gray said he was not hunting for beast cores now, he couldn't travel with him. They all wanted to get a good position in the faction, and these beast cores were the key to that. I'm Keith. If we cross paths again, then I'll accompany you, but for now, I guess I have to continue on my own, Keith said with an honest expression. All right then, I'm Gray, Gray replied and kept the corpse of the golden fur panther in his storage ring. Keith stretched out a hand and after shaking Gray's hand, he turned around and left. The main reason he wanted to travel with Gray mainly lied on the fact that their mission here was to survive for a week. Forming an alliance with a powerful figure like Gray means he could guarantee his safety till then. However, the side quest didn't give him such luxury. He could tell that Gray had a certain confidence in himself and didn't seem too interested in getting a high number of beast cores. But he on the other hand wanted to get as many beast cores as he could to ensure he acquired a very high level when he joined the faction. According to what he knew, each member of the faction is ranked. The higher the rank, the better the treatment. Gray watched Keith leave with an interesting look. Interesting guy, don't you think? Void asked while staring in the direction Keith faced. Yeah, we should continue. This place is big. Gray nodded before focusing on his main mission. Aren't you forgetting something? Void looked at Gray. What? Gray was a little confused. We just acquired a good meat, aren't we going to eat it? Void couldn't wait to taste the meat of the golden fur panther. Oh, I forgot about that. Gray soon got to work with the corpse of the golden fur panther, and after some minutes, the sweet aroma of well-cooked meat started to spread across the forest. Gray's cooking skills seemed to be improving according to Void and his teacher. He felt they were only praising him so they could eat more food. Void happily ate the meat of the golden fur panther with a wide smile plastered on his face. When Gray tasted the meat of the panther, he knew it was top-notch meat. "I wonder what a dragon would taste like," he suddenly said after tasting the meat of the golden fur panther. If the panther tasted this good, he couldn't even imagine just how great a dragon's meat would taste. "You also have this fantasy as well?" "We'll definitely find out in due time," Void replied with a mouthful of meat. He could barely speak properly, but he didn't care. They continued eating. Gray didn't forget to send some to his teacher. After they were done eating, they continued surveying the place. One more day went by and he was pretty much clear on how the place looked. He even tagged all the places that had powerful beasts in his head. As long as he wanted to, he could battle all the magical beasts at the peak of the Overlord Plain. There were over 30 peak Overlord Plain beasts, but only 5 of them were above the golden fur panther. If he rated them, then they would be on the same level as those old men from the Horned race. Unless he uses the fusion state against those men, it would be difficult for him to defeat them. "Alright, so what now?" Void asked. They were done with what Gray wanted, and they still had 5 more days to stay in the place. "I'm going to find a secluded place to train." Gray already knew this place like the back of his palm, so it didn't take him long before he found a secluded cave. For days went by in the blink of an eye. Inside the cave, Gray hadn't taken a step out of the cave since he entered. He had been diligently cultivating. He focused mainly on comprehending his elements. Since there was nothing to do, he wanted to see if he could improve his elemental grade. "You're a nut job." Gray's shut eyes opened and he looked at the entrance to the cave. Outside the cave, he could hear people fighting. A familiar voice, he muttered before disappearing from where he was sitting. Void raised his head but went back to sleep since he couldn't be bothered with others. Outside the cave, a young man was being chased by 3 others. The young man was at the peak of the Overlord Plain, while those chasing him were in the 8th and 9th stage of the Overlord Plain. "We've been searching for you all this while. Do you think joining this faction will save you? You've always been a failure, and you will fail here as well," one of the young men chasing the young man said with an evil grin. The young man being chased was surprisingly Keith, the youth Gray saved from the golden fur panther. Keith looked at the face of the trio as they surrounded him. "You're spineless fools. If you have guts, why don't you fight me one-on-one?" Keith gritted his teeth angrily. That's a trick that only works on brainless morons. Individually, we're obviously no match for you. Why do you think I teamed up with them?" The youth in the 9th stage of the Overlord Plain scoffed. Keith looked at them with an angry expression. He had collected enough beast cores to get a good position when entering the faction. Now, he risked losing everything. "Hey!" He heard a voice behind him and he couldn't help but shake from shock. He hurriedly turned around, only to see a familiar face. "It's you!" he exclaimed when he saw Gray's face. He still recalled the abnormally strong Gray. "Yeah, you seem to always be in a certain type of predicament whenever we meet." Gray looked past Keith's shoulder to see the faces of his pursuers. Keith chuckled awkwardly when he heard this. The first time he saw Gray, he was being chased by the golden fur panther and he was already thinking of using his talisman to escape. Now, he was being chased once again, and the thought of using his talisman came back to his mind once again. The trio chasing Keith paused and looked at Gray. "Who's that?" one of them asked. "I have no idea, but they seem to be acquainted," the one in the 9th stage replied. Looking at Keith, he noticed something which made him a little confused. Keith seemed to be more relaxed the moment Gray appeared. Chapter 8:17. "Hello." Gray waved at the group behind Keith. The young man in the 9th stage of the Overlord Plain was a little taken aback that Gray took the initiative to speak to them. He nodded as a form of greeting. Can you just forget whatever he did to you and let him go? Gray asked with a smile. This was completely out of his character since he rarely spoke with people, much less even begging on someone's behalf. Normally, he would have attacked these people since he was already acquainted with Keith. But he felt he had been too detached from people for some time now. Although he wouldn't become like Klaus who befriended everyone, he didn't mind making a new friend now and then. And these people might probably join the same faction as himself, so he didn't want to complicate things. The other reason he hadn't attacked was that he didn't know why they were chasing Keith, nor the relationship they had. What if he attacked them and Keith turned on him? He wanted to clarify things first before coming to a conclusion on what to do. Keith looked at Gray, never expecting him to be someone this humble. He had seen Gray fight, and knew for a fact that Gray could take on two of these guys, so their two had no problem with defeating this trio, but Gray wanted to settle the issue in a way that wouldn't involve any conflict. The young man in the 9th stage looked at his companions and fell deep in thoughts. He was trying to figure out Gray's intentions. On a normal day, he would feel like Gray was weak, so he was trying to find a way to safely resolve the conflict, but from Keith's expression, he knew that wasn't the most likely case. Since you're asking on his behalf, I will let him go for now. Take care, the young man said before turning around and leaving with his group. All right, take care. Gray waved at them with an amiable smile. Well, that went better than I imagined. He turned to Keith. Robert is a wise person, he could tell there was something off about you, so he decided to retreat instead of pushing on. Keith shook his head with a sigh. I see, sensible people like that tend to live longer. Gray commented before walking back to the cave. Keith looked behind him with cold eyes, before walking after Gray. So, what have you been doing? Keith asked as he caught up with Gray. I've been resting here. Gray replied nonchalantly as he entered the cave. When Keith entered the cave, he knew for a fact that Gray wasn't lying. From how the place looked, it seemed like he had been staying here since he came for the trial. You're probably the only one who doesn't seem to care about the trial, he said with a wry smile. His contact with Gray had been short, but he couldn't hide his interest in him. Gray seemed to have a certain mysterious halo around him that makes people want to know more about him. Not really. Gray shrugged and took a seat. Keith had gotten a good number of beast cores, so he didn't mind staying with Gray. If he went out on his own, he might risk being attacked once again. It was best he stayed with Gray for the last 2 days to ensure that he passed the trial successfully. In another part of the forest, the trio who just left paused and started discussing. Robert, why did you let them go? One of the young men with him asked, confused with Robert's decision-making. Do you think that guy who appeared is simple? Robert asked the young man. He's only in the 8th stage like me, I can take care of him. The young man replied. You need to learn to be more observant, if not, you'll die without even knowing how. Robert said calmly before looking back in the direction Gray and Keith headed. What now? The second youth asked. We'll have to join the faction, what else can we do? The young lady ordered us not to return without the news of his death. Do you want to go back while he's still alive? Keith said before walking away. I wonder why these people can't mind their own business. The youth in the 8th stage of the Overlord plane said angrily. To him, Gray's involvement was the main reason they were unable to complete their objective. Even if they couldn't kill Keith now, they would get the chance to once he was eliminated from the trial. Now they had to risk joining the faction, which would mean spending more time on the mission. Time went by and it was finally the last day of the 7 days trial. Gray had been living a pretty comfortable life, eating the meat of the golden fur panther while also discussing with Keith. He found out that Keith was a small figure in his family and he somehow managed to offend the young family head, and now he wanted him dead. The reason for their dispute was all because of a young lady who fell in love with Keith. Keith was a handsome figure with sparkling blue eyes and white hair. Although he was not on Gray and Klaus level, he wasn't too far behind. Gray found the story to be absurd. How would someone want to kill another person all because the person he likes someone else? Something is definitely wrong with whoever that guy is. Gray stated after he heard the complete story. Is that the reason you joined this faction? He asked after a moment of silence. Keith nodded. Honestly, I would have never joined this faction. It is on the verge of falling, and there are more powerful factions that I can join, but I don't have enough time, so I had to join them. Although they're on the decline, they're still a powerful faction. Interesting, Gray said before looking at the entrance of the cave with a thoughtful expression. How about you? Why did you join this faction? I'm sure someone of your talent wouldn't have a problem joining the very best factions around. Keith asked when he saw Gray's expression. I find them interesting, so I decided to check them out, Gray said nonchalantly. Chapter 8:18. Keith looked at Gray, unsure of how to reply. Gray came because he found the faction interesting. This confirmed his thought of Gray being from a powerful background. Now he understood why Gray didn't seem so bothered with getting beast cores. This was the last day, and Gray was still sitting here nonchalantly. The urge of asking Gray if he wanted to get beast cores came to his mind, but he decided to let it go. It was Gray's choice after all. Gray naturally didn't know what he was thinking about. He stayed in the cave almost all through the day. A few hours before sunset, Gray finally stood up from his sitting position. Is it time? Void asked. Gray nodded before walking towards the exit of the cave. Keith was standing outside, looking at the scenery. He had gotten bored of staying in the same place for 2 days, so he decided to stretch his legs. Where are you going? He asked when he saw Gray coming out from the cave. Hunting. Gray's reply was simple and short. Finally, Keith said and followed behind him. This was what he had been bothered about, but since Gray was finally taking the step, he felt a little excited. He wanted to see just how powerful Gray was. Although he saw him act the last time against the golden fur panther, he felt that wasn't Gray's full strength. After leaving the cave, Gray maneuvered through the forest like a beast who had stayed there all his life. From where he was headed, Keith guessed Gray wasn't moving blindly, he most probably had a target. A few minutes later, he found Gray's target. A large raven that stood over 3 meters tall was resting on a small hill. The raven was at the peak of the Overlord Plain, and the aura it released was on par with the golden fur panther. To think he wants to fight against that. Keith clucked his tongue, amazed by Gray's choice. 10 minutes later, Gray was standing victoriously over the fallen raven. It took him no longer than 10 minutes to kill a beast at the peak of the Overlord Plain, while still being in the 8th stage of the Overlord Plain. Gray's talent was something Keith didn't even dare to dream of having. Let's go, Gray said to Keith before keeping the core and corpse of the raven. Their next target was a fire lion that was located deep within the forest. This lion was stronger than the raven, but Gray still managed to defeat it within 15 minutes without sustaining any major injuries. He had some injuries, but they were only superficial ones, things that he couldn't really be concerned with. They soon went for the third beast. At this moment, Keith finally recalled what Gray said to him when he invited him to join him. Gray told him he was surveying the place, now he knew why. Gray planned to take out all the beasts at the very peak of the Overlord Plain. A bold yet insane plan. While others were thinking of killing the weaker ones, he didn't even put them in their eyes. This was what being a true genius was. He didn't need to bother with the small fries, he attacked the big ones from the start. While Gray was on his hunt, something was happening outside the trial ground. In a room outside the trail ground, a group of young men dressed in loose clothes were staring at a map that seemed like a hologram, and right before their eyes, they watched as one of the brightest lights went out one by one. At first, there were over 30 bright lights, but in the space of 2 hours, 15 went out. What shocked them even more was that of the 5 which shone the brightest, one of them was down as well. This was something they never expected to happen. If the lights were dying out with a difference of hours, then they wouldn't be too concerned, but the speed at which they were dying down was alarming. Call the Elder, one of the young men said to another. The young man nodded and went away. A few minutes later, he returned with the man who welcomed Gray and those who came for the recruitment over. "Why are you calling me?" the old man asked with a calm expression. "Elder, look." One of the young men pointed at the light dots. At the time the elder arrived, one of the lights was dying down, so he witnessed it as the man showed him the map. "Oh, there's a good budding among them," the elder said with a smile. Even if the person who defeated this special beast was also at the peak of the Overlord Plane, they must be powerful to be able to do this. "That's not the problem, Elder. The problem is that over 15 has gone down in the space of 2 hours. The young man explained with a wry smile. "Who? Are you sure of what you're saying?" the elder asked, stunned. "Yes, if you can wait a little while, then you will see what I'm talking about," the young man said. The elder stroked his beard before nodding. If what they said was truly happening, then there's a chance that there might be a figure in that sage plane in there, or the top figures amongst the recruits teamed up to take out these beasts. The thought of one person being the cause of this didn't come to his mind unless the person somehow broke through to the sage plane inside the trial ground. If they knew an 8th stage Overlord Plane Elementalist was the cause of this, it was unknown how they would feel. The elder was still waiting when he saw the scene right before his eyes. In 20 minutes, another bright light had died down, and this one was among the top ones. "I wonder which people are behind this. Defeating these beasts is an impressive feat," the elder commented. "Should we do anything to stop it?" one of the young men asked with a pained expression. "Why would you?" the elder asked. "Elder, it took so much effort to groom these beasts," one of the young men blurted out. "You can always groom more. Bringing a good talent to the faction is the objective now," the elder said before walking out of the room. The young men exchanged glances, a little frustrated since they have to watch their efforts go down the drain. They couldn't help but curse at the person or people who were behind this. Chapter 8:19. Keith was having one of the greatest shocks of his life. He was watching Gray hunting all the beasts that were at the peak of the Overlord Plane, alone. Gray had been fighting the beasts on his own without even having to ask for help any time. What was worse was that Gray's attacks were too swift, and he seems to have a certain ability that increases the weight of the things around him. He didn't really know what this ability was, but he was sure that it was what makes the beasts he fights against fall over when he gets close to them. It has been 6 hours since Gray decided to hunt for beast cores, and he couldn't say he wasn't amazed. Gray's abilities were definitely on par with those geniuses with Scion Elemental grades and higher. He had been fortunate to witness a genius with Scion Elemental grade, and the genius was just like Gray, too powerful for those in the same stage as himself. Keith could most certainly bet with his life that Gray had a Scion Elemental grade. There's no way Gray was going to tell him it was lower and he would believe it. Another shocking thing he found out was that Gray's healing speed was unbelievable. While Keith was still thinking about Gray's ability, Gray was focused on the last beast on his list. There were countless beasts here, and Gray was sure most of the people here collected at least 50 beast cores. Even Keith had over 60. According to what he found out, most of the people here aren't too bothered about the stage of the beast, opting to go for quantity instead of quality. For someone like Keith, killing magical beasts in the early stages of the Overlord Plane was too easy. He could easily kill 10 to 20 a single day. If Gray wanted to, he could kill over 100 in a single day. Thud! The corpse of a giant snake slammed into the ground. It was dead. This snake had white scales which sparkled even at night. Gray was panting slightly from the battle. Of all the beasts he had fought against, this snake was the trickiest one. But in the end, he still managed to kill it with a decisive blow. He was still resting when he noticed a group walking out from the left. They were 10 in total, and they were staring at Gray in shock. They had been targeting this snake for some time now, and after finally coming up with a good plan after multiple failures, they saw Gray fighting against it. They initially wanted to help out and then force Gray to leave it to them, but on seeing that Gray was not doing badly against it, they decided to wait by the side, and after the battle was over, they would step up. Even if the snake won, it would be injured by Gray's attacks and grow weak. If Gray were to kill it, he would not be 100% since he went through a tough battle with the snake. All in all, they would be the winners. Keith noticed them and moved closer to Gray, looking at the group approaching them. Impressive, a young lady in the 9th stage said as she walked over. She seemed to be the leader of this group. Gray didn't reply as he stared at her. He could see her eyes trailed on the corpse of the snake, seemingly checking to see if the core was still in place. "What do you want?" Keith asked calmly. He could already sense that they were up to no good, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Besides, he knew Gray would have a way to fight against these people. With him here as well, he would never let them harm Gray. "You watched him fight alone, how cowardly," the young lady said with a hateful tone. She felt Keith was a coward who was only hanging around Gray because he was powerful. The thought of Gray wanting to fight against the beast on his own didn't even cross her mind. Who would want to fight against such a beast alone? Keith wanted to speak, but he held back. Even if he told them it was Gray's wish, they wouldn't believe him. The young lady looked at him in a demeaning manner before moving her gaze to Gray. Her eyes paused on his face for some time, a little stunned by his handsomeness. She didn't want to admit it, but Gray was the most handsome guy she had ever seen. "Since you took such an effort in killing this snake, we'll let you keep the corpse. All we want is the core," she said with a soft smile. The corpse of this snake was quite expensive, and it could be used to exchange for things in the faction after joining. According to what they know, they wouldn't be given the freedom to use all the techniques in the faction. Instead, they would have to earn points to exchange for a technique. Corpses of beasts like this could be used to exchange for a fair amount of points. "Not interested, move aside," Gray replied coldly. He had never been friendly with people who wanted to take advantage of him. To him, this group was his enemies. The fact that they waited until he had killed the snake showed their nature. "Come on, you already made it to the last day, even successful at that. It would be a shame if you have to use your talisman in the end." A young man walked out from the group and said, "Why would anyone risk getting himself eliminated because of a single beast core?" To them, it wasn't worth it. Gray knew this as well, but there was no way he would let people ride on him. Given the effort he put in to defeat this snake, he wasn't even interested in leaving a scale for anyone, much less its core. When he heard the young man's threat, he smirked. "I won't be the one using the talisman," he thought to himself. Chapter 8:20. The group stared at Gray menacingly, waiting for him to move aside so they could extract the core of the snake. Gray naturally had no plans of letting others steal his things, especially people like this who feel they can bully others with their numbers. "Move," the young lady said, her expression turning cold. "You're not getting this. I'll advise you to leave at once. I can tell you already have enough cores to get a good position when you join the faction," Gray said, not budging even by a little. Even people at the peak of the Overlord plane couldn't threaten him, much less this group who only had 4 people in the 9th stage. "I guess you'll be getting eliminated then," the young lady said and prepared to attack. "Hey! With the likes of you? I doubt that." Gray smirked and his figure vanished. "He's a space elementalist, be careful everyone," someone from the group yelled. They were currently all standing close to each other, preparing to attack Gray. When he vanished, they all took a defensive stance, waiting for him to appear. Gray's figure appeared in the midst of 4 of the 10 people in the group, and the second he appeared, he used his gravitational force field. Being unaware of this, the 4 youths fell face first on the ground. Gray didn't hold back and straight up attacked them with a powerful move. The other 6 people were stunned, still confused as to why the 4 youths fell on the ground when Gray appeared. Boom! Gray's attack exploded out, and a bright light soon followed after. All 4 youths used their talismans to escape what would have been a fatal attack for them. Luckily, they were able to move even in the gravitational force field. Gray hadn't gotten to the level where he could make those in the late stages of the Overlord plane become immobile. What he could do was to slow down their speed. Lucky! Gray clicked his tongue before turning to the other 6. He tilted his head to the side to get a good view of their faces. What just happened? A young lady among the remaining 6 asked, confused. He took out 4 of them simultaneously, and you guys are next. Keith said coldly. He was currently standing on the other side of the group, prepared to attack the moment Gray moves. After using the gravitational force field in the presence of the others, it would be difficult for him to use it to catch them off guard immediately, so Gray didn't plan on using it now. You are going to pay for this, the young lady who was the leader of the group said slowly and coldly. One of the people eliminated was a close friend of hers, so she would never forgive Gray for this. I'm only doing to you what you wanted to do to me. I see no wrong in that, Gray stated and attacked ruthlessly. Keith, seeing this, attacked as well. He had been raring to go for a long time now, so when this chance came, he attacked excitedly. Gray had been the one doing all the fighting, so he was getting a little bored of only watching. The group of 6 were taken aback. They were the ones who had more numbers, yet Gray and Keith were the ones who took the initiative in attacking. This was one of the weirdest things they had experienced. They attacked as well. Keith fought against 2 while Gray was fighting against the other 4. Keith's opponents were in the 8th and 7th stage respectively. Gray had 2 people in the 9th stage, and the other 2 were in the 7th stage. Of the 4 people he eliminated during the first attack, 2 were in the 9th stage, while the other 2 were in the 7th stage. A few minutes after the start of the battle, the group realized something horrible. Gray was not someone they could mess with. Unfortunately, it was too late for them. Hey, why don't we just end this amicably and leave? One of the young men in the group asked. Gray's strength was terrifying, it scared them. At this moment, they knew the chances of them being eliminated was very high. Gray wasn't giving them any chance to even escape. One has to know that he was fighting against 4 people, and he still had the upper hand. After going through a tough battle against such a powerful snake as well. Gray didn't even bother to listen to the pleas of the young man, and continued his attack on them. As time went on, he was forced to use his talisman. With the young man gone, the pressure on the others increased. Gray's strength was above theirs, but what made him this horrifying was his versatility. Having more elements made him a complete fighter. Adding his physique to it made things worse for others. They could barely keep up with his speed, yet he's even faster if he used his physical body enhanced with his elements. 10 minutes later. Only the young lady who was the leader of the group was left. Keith had also dealt with his opponents. Although he was fighting against 2 people, he was able to deal with them. Gray taking out most of their companions gave him a helping hand since it distracted them for him to take the advantage. Why are you so powerful? The young lady asked with gritted teeth. Because I don't want to be bullied by the likes of you, Gray said and opened his palm which had a fireball on it. He sent it her way and she was covered by a bright light after using the talisman. She was already at the end of the trial, but making the mistake of attacking Gray cost her a spot in the faction. Keith looked at the freakish Gray. Even though he knew he would be victorious, he still found it amazing. Gray was too powerful to still be in the Overlord plane. Chapter 8:21. Outside the trial ground. People were walking out through the gate with a proud smile, except for a selected few, Gray included. He didn't see the test as anything of a challenge in the first place, so he naturally didn't have to celebrate it. When they stepped out, they saw some people gathered, all with gloomy faces. Looking at the crowd, Gray saw a familiar face. It was the young lady he eliminated the previous night. Oh, they are still here. Amusing, he thought to himself. He didn't even bother to look in their direction for a second time as he followed the group, heading in the direction of where those who successfully passed the trial were. When the young lady noticed the people coming out, she was staring intently at the crowd, seemingly searching for someone. She first saw Keith's figure before her eyes trailed to the person standing close to him. You! She pointed at Gray angrily and tried to rush after him. Gray, just like everyone, turned to look in the direction the voice came from in curiosity. The young lady's voice drew the attention of everyone. "You sneaky bastard! I can't accept the fact that a backstabber like you can get into this honorable faction, and I can't," the young lady said through gritted teeth. Gray looked behind him, trying to see who the young lady was talking to. "She can't be about me, right?" he couldn't help but ask Void. "It seems like it." "What did you do to her?" Void asked. Gray had the urge of picking Void and kicking him into oblivion when he heard this question. Void was with him when he fought against the young lady. How could he ask what he did to her? He decided to let the matter go and not bother about it. He had already gotten into the faction anyway. "Gray, I think she's talking to you." Keith moved closer to Gray and whispered. "When she's done making a fool of herself, she'll keep quiet." Gray replied nonchalantly. The young lady continued yelling, and the elder who addressed them at the start took notice of it. He approached her. "Young lady, what seems to be the problem?" "There's a sneaky backstabber among your ranks. I have no problem with people passing the trial and me failing it, but my conscience cannot let me allow someone like that to join your prestigious faction and sully its name," the young lady said with hatred. The elder looked at her and asked, "Oh, what happened?" If what the young lady was saying was true, then he wanted to weed out such a figure. Although the person had successfully passed the trial, people like this might bring destruction to the faction in the future. "We were fighting against a powerful peak rank 5, and when I was on the verge of defeating it, he attacked us from nowhere, forcing us to use our talismans." The young lady pointed at the others from her group. They nodded to her words. Gray didn't have any visible change in his expression when he heard this. Keith, however, was irritated as he heard her speak. A glint flashed through the eyes of the elder. They were the ones who took down all the peak rank 5 beasts. He thought in realization. He originally felt a group would be the ones who could take out the beasts in such a short time. "Can you bring out the individual who did this?" he asked. The young lady nodded and pointed at Gray, who was looking at them with a bland look, making it difficult for them to know what he was thinking. Keith gritted his teeth and retorted, "Lying bitch. You wanted to take something you didn't work for, you deserved getting eliminated." "Sir, he was also involved as well." The young lady pointed at Keith. Everyone in the crowd looked at Gray and Keith. Among the crowd of those who passed the trail, the trio who were chasing after Keith was watching what was happening with interest. "You two, come forward." The elder called Gray and Keith over. Gray walked forward. Keith was behind him as well. "Is what they're saying true?" the elder asked. "No, they're lying." Keith was the one who replied. The elder looked at Gray with a serious expression. "I want your answer." Gray was the one the young lady accused at first, so he wanted to hear Gray's reply. "No." Gray replied with a calm expression. "Shut up, you deceiver," the young lady said coldly. The elder looked at the duo, a little unsure of who to believe. Gray didn't even try to defend himself, only giving a single reply. The young lady gave a good explanation, and when he thought of what happened with the top beasts, he felt the young lady was correct. "Stop disturbing, you're making a fool of yourself," Gray said with a blank expression. The young lady looked at Gray and felt annoyed, but she wanted to ensure that Gray didn't get into the faction. "Why don't you tell me your side of the story?" The elder thought for a while before looking at Gray. Being a big faction, he naturally wouldn't make a decision based on a one-sided story. As long as Gray could give him a good explanation, he naturally would know what to do. "What do you believe?" Gray asked the elder. "I've heard her side, so I can't make a decision for now without hearing yours," the elder replied. He didn't feel annoyed because of Gray's question. "I don't need to ambush someone like them. I can defeat them alone. Why would I bother to ambush them?" Gray's words stunned the elder, as well as everyone present there. He was still in the 8th stage of the Overlord plane, yet he said with such confidence that he could defeat 10 people. Of the 10 people, there were 4 people in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane, and others in the 8th and 7th stage. "You defeat us?" The young lady laughed in mockery. If Gray thought he could defeat all 10 of them, then there must be something wrong in his head. Chapter 8:22. The elder looked at Gray, amazed. He didn't expect Gray to use such an extreme method to justify himself. Other than the top geniuses in the faction, he didn't think there would be anyone who could achieve such a feat. Proud fool, you're going to expose yourself with this. 4 of us is enough to show the fraud you are. The young lady said. Gray chuckled when he heard this. The young lady's words had already given her away. The fact that she didn't say she could defeat him alone showed that Gray was stronger than her. The elder didn't need to see Gray fight against them before he knew the young lady was lying. However, he wanted to see Gray's strength with his eyes. Come with me, the others should continue with the normal procedure. He signaled to Gray and Keith, along with the group of 10. If Gray managed to beat them alone, then he was the one who was killing all the beasts at the peak of rank 5. Gray was still on the 8th stage of the Overlord plane. This was the most significant factor about everything. A lot of people feel there isn't much of a difference between the 9th and the 8th stage, but for geniuses, there was a massive difference. Any genius who could not only defeat another genius in the 9th stage, but multiple geniuses was someone that was on a different level entirely. One has to know that the beasts Gray defeated were not normal peak rank 5 beasts, rather, they could be grouped among the elites in that stage. Only those geniuses at the peak of the Overlord plane from these top factions and families could achieve such a feat. The fact that the young lady's group of 10 couldn't kill the snake showed just how powerful it was. Yet, Gray did it all by himself. After taking them to a separate place with a platform, the elder told them to wait and vanished. He appeared a few minutes later, accompanied by 2 other elders, an old man wearing white loose clothes, and a middle-aged man. They will stand as judges for the battle. The first elder said. As long as we defeat him, we win, right? The young lady asked, to confirm if Gray's words were taken seriously. Yes, as long as all 10 of you can defeat him, then you're the winner. Not just that, but he will be kicked out and you will join the faction. The elder said. All 10 of us? The young lady asked. The elder nodded. The young lady looked at the others with a smile and they quickly prepared themselves for the battle. Gray, on the other hand, was staring at them with an amused smile. He felt like he was staring at a group of fools. From the elder's expression and words, he could discern the elder had already come to a conclusion. He only wanted to test him out. After all, he was the one who brought the suggestion in the first place. Are you really going through with this? Keith asked Gray, a little worried. He knew Gray was powerful, and he was confident if it was only 4 people, but against 10 people, his confidence wasn't high. Relax, they can't beat me, even if I decide not to attack. Gray said calmly before walking forward. He knew the group already knew some of his attacks, so they must have thought of a way to counter it, especially his gravitational force field. However, he had a few tricks up his sleeve that he hadn't shown yet. Are you ready? The elder asked Gray and the group. Gray nodded, likewise the group. The young lady decided all 10 of them would fight against Gray. Since the elder said they would get into the faction if they managed to defeat Gray, she wanted to be certain of their qualification. All right, begin. The elder declared the start of the battle. Gray took the initiative in the attack and vanished. The eyes of the elders brightened when they saw this. Space elementalists are one of the few elementalists who can fight with multiple opponents thanks to their quick movement. This gave them a little confidence in Gray's ability. Spread out, the young lady said as soon as Gray vanished. The group separated, ensuring that what happened during their first encounter didn't repeat itself. Gray appeared close to one of them in the 8th stage and attacked. He didn't plan on using the same strategy to begin with. The 8th stage Overlord plane elementalist blocked the attack, but he was sent flying from the impact. The others rushed over to assist him. One-on-one, they were no match for Gray, so they didn't want that to happen. Gray resisted the urge of trying to continue his attack. He knew it was impossible. With a spread of his arms, 3 inscriptions lit up in the sky and attacked those around. One of the inscriptions sent an attack at the 8th stage Overlord plane elementalist he attacked. He also sent out attacks as well. The elders watched the battle with a smile of approval. Just Gray's first move showed he was a well-seasoned fighter, unlike most geniuses. He displayed 3 elements already: fire, lightning, and space element, which already made him good. The fact that both his lightning and fire element were special types made things even better. Being an inscriber also amazed them. A space elementalist was also great against a large group. Being an inscriber made Gray even more overpowered. Gray and the group continued fighting, and even when fighting against so many people, he was able to protect himself from any sneak attack. Gray's battle awareness was something unlike others his age. 3 minutes into the battle, Gray was finally able to take out one of the group. At this moment, he showed his 4th element, the earth element. The elders looked at Gray, and all they could say was, "Here's a complete package." Chapter 8:23. Gray was standing on the platform. On the ground were the young lady and her group. He was panting slightly from the battle, and he sustained some injuries from their attacks, but he successfully defeated them. The young lady raised her head to look at Gray in fear. She never expected him to be this powerful. Even when fighting against 10 people, he still showed strength that surpassed what he did before. However, that wasn't the most shocking thing in the entire battle. A domain, at such a young age. The elder dressed in white said, visibly shocked. "Such talent, I have not seen anyone able to awaken their domain before the sage plane." The middle-aged man added in shock. During the last phase of the battle, Gray used his domain to trounce the young lady and her friends. They were unable to defend against its strength. Having a domain in the Overlord plane made him invincible in said plane. Even after breaking through to the sage plane, he would be a force to be reckoned with. "You lose," Gray said emotionlessly. He didn't hold back when beating them up. The only thing he restrained himself from doing was killing. Other than that, he beat them up badly. At least for the next 2 months, they wouldn't be able to function properly unless they get a top-light elementalist to heal them. Keith, on the other hand, had his mouth wide open. Void was in his hand, and he couldn't help but push his mouth close. "You're drooling on me," he said sarcastically. "Oh, sorry." Keith apologized, but he was still stunned by what he just witnessed. Gray's abilities were mind-blowing. He thought he had seen Gray in his full strength, but the domain blew him off his feet. How could a single person be this talented? It should be illegal for him to be this powerful, right? He asked himself. Even those geniuses at the peak of the Overlord plane are no match for Gray. This was a fact that he almost didn't want to believe. The young lady wanted to speak when Gray said they lost, but she soon lost consciousness. Not just her, but the others as well. "Can we go back now?" Gray turned to the elders. Had the elder taken the side of the young lady after hearing her statement, he would have lost interest in the faction and left. However, the elder handled the matter with wisdom, and this gave him the confidence to show more of his strength. Beating this group should place him in a high place in the faction. Showing his domain would take it even further. Looking at the elders, he could tell that they were impressed. "No need, show us the cause you acquired." The elder who brought them here waved his hand. Gray and Keith nodded and did as ordered. They each brought out their beast cores, and Keith had more, but Gray's cores radiated more power. "I thought as much," the elder said with an understanding look. "You were the one who killed all the strongest beasts?" he asked Gray. Gray nodded to his words. "Alone?" Gray nodded once again. Since Keith was with him, it was easy to assume that he helped him when he was fighting against the beast. "I see. According to the rules, you can either keep the cores or exchange them for points," the elder said to the duo. He looked at them before asking, "What do you plan to do?" "I have no use for the cores, I'll exchange them for points," Gray replied. He had multiple cores with him. Besides, he didn't drop all the cores. The core belonging to the Golden Fur Panther was kept. The Golden Fur Panther used a weird move he wanted to understand, so he planned on checking the core. He hadn't seen anything on it for now, but he was certain that over time he would make a breakthrough. Keith made the same decision as him. Gray got more points even though he had lesser cores due to the quality of the cores. Gray asked what he could get with the points, and the elder told him about the rules of the faction. The members of the faction are ranked, from rank 1 to 9. Gray and Keith skipped rank 1 and were immediately admitted to rank 2 since they managed to get a good number of cores. Members in rank 2 are eligible to get certain techniques and go to a few places those in rank 1 couldn't. Once one gets to rank 7, they are eligible to become an elder in the faction. Of course, they had to become an elemental sovereign first. The elder took Gray and Keith into the faction. After taking them inside, the elder called a young lady walking by and told her to take them to get registered. He also instructed her to tell the person giving the duo their badges something, but Gray didn't hear what he told her. The young lady bowed to the elder and took Gray and Keith to a large building to get them registered. They were both given badges, and on their badges, the place they would be staying was written on it. The duo would be staying in the same area, with Keith staying in the house before Gray's. The faction was huge. From the gates to the main part, there was a distance of over 1,500 meters, and just like when Gray got admitted to the Lunar Academy, each person is entitled to a personal house. The young lady left them after showing them where they would be staying. Gray looked at the place, and it was, well, empty. The essence here is great. I wonder how the library here is. With that thought in mind, he left his apartment and headed out. Keith saw him leaving and ran up to him. "Where are you going?" he asked when he caught up to him. "Library," Gray replied. "Oh, all right." Keith nodded and followed him. They asked someone for the direction, and after a few minutes of walking, they got to the place. "That's encouraging," Gray muttered when he saw the size of the library. Compared to the libraries he had gone to, this one was the smallest. Freednovel.cm. He walked into the library but was stopped by a young man just after he walked in. "Badge?" the young man inquired. Gray brought out his badge and gave it to the young man. "Okay, 2 points for every 20 minutes you stay here. If you go to a higher level, the points deducted will increase." The young man placed the badge on a stone that lit up and a strange symbol appeared on the badge. "You can go in now." He passed the badge back to Gray. Gray took the badge and looked at it curiously. He recalled that he was given a total of 130 points for the beast cores he handed over, but he forgot to ask how he would get the points. Keith had lesser than 100 points. Walking past the entrance of the library, Gray knew not to judge a book by its cover. The inside of the library was gigantic, with multiple bookshelves, and there were even stairs, taking them to a higher place. "Looks like this place is allocated to those in rank 1. Keith said as they looked at the place. "Okay." Gray nodded and walked toward a bookshelf. "You sense it too, right?" Gray asked Void telepathically. "Yes, this is a separate space," Void replied. The space inside the library was created by a powerful space elementalist. Gray never thought he would witness something like this here. After walking for a few minutes, he saw a book titled, "The Rules." "Guess you're first," he said to himself before picking it up. When he picked it up, he felt a buzz from his badge, and looking at the place where the book was previously sitting, he saw a number there, 1 point every 1 hour he had the book. "Looks like without points then staying here will be useless," he said to himself before taking a seat. Initially, he thought he would be given special treatment after showing his talent. Even though he didn't want that, he felt all factions would do things like that, but to his surprise, other than appreciating his strength, this faction didn't give him any special treatment. What they were doing was simple: if you want something, get points and acquire them. Most factions will want to give Gray special treatments for his talent, however, this faction was different. After taking the rule book, he started reading it. Since he just joined the faction, this was the first thing he felt he should know. He didn't want to get involved in any issues later on. Keith also picked a rule book and opened it as well. The duo read the book for over an hour. By the time they were done with it, they had already spent 2 hours in the library. Chapter 824. Permanent Faction. A young man could be seen sitting under a tree, in a crossed-leg position and both eyes closed. Beside him was a black cat that seemed to be asleep. It had been 1 month since Gray got into the Permanent Faction, and in this 1 month, he had taken his time to get used to the place and also ensure he didn't do anything that would get him in trouble. He had used up all his points in the library. Unfortunately, he hasn't even been able to learn any new techniques. This library contained more information about the continent compared to the previous one. It even had some details concerning the War of Gods, which he found amazing. He read about it for long before switching to books on arrays. Given his love for arrays, it was natural he would want to learn more. Not just that, but he still had to worry about being marked. He might not have been attacked in a while by necromancers, but he still didn't forget about it. This was an issue he wanted to sort out as soon as possible. He also read about forge mastering and other things. All in all, he was flooding his head with information. He opened his eyes to look at his badge. "I'm out of points." "What did you expect?" Void asked sarcastically. "Fortunately, I got info about a nice place to cultivate privately here, so it wasn't wasted," Gray said with a smile. "You spent all the points on reading stuff. If I didn't ask Keith about it, you wouldn't have been able to find it so soon," Void said with an annoyed expression. "Fine, but my points wouldn't be enough anyway. At the time we found out about it, I had less than 50 points. A session there costs 60 points, if I recall correctly." Gray tried to shift the blame. "You'll have to go to the mission hall if you want points. You can also trade the beast cores you have with you," Void suggested. Over time, they found out how points were earned, and that was through missions. The higher the rank of a member, the better the missions. For instance, the young man he met at the library the first time he went there was on a mission. After completing the mission, he would be assigned a specific amount of points. Gray naturally wouldn't do something so trivial. There should be missions that would take him outside the faction. He had gotten the uniform of the faction, and surprisingly, it was not free. The faction was very strict in upholding its rules, but what he liked about the faction was its unity. It reminded him of his time back at the Lunar Academy. There are higher-ranked faction members that occasionally give out lessons to lower-ranked members, and it costs points as well. There are a few who do it for free. Gray had attended one of the classes, and it was not bad. Since joining the faction, almost everything he had to do revolved around points. Now he understood why he rarely saw people when he entered the faction for the first time. They were all out on missions. He found this better since the members would go out more for experience. Gray got up from where he was sitting and headed straight for the mission hall. On getting there, he quickly went to the place for rank 2 members. Without a badge, he wouldn't be able to enter this place. Likewise, if his rank was lower, he wouldn't be able to get in as well. He looked at the mission board and all sorts of missions were placed there, from escorting a carriage to being bodyguards for special events. There were even missions that dealt with helping search for lost pets. The points allocated to each mission mainly relied on the difficulty of the mission. Gray looked through the missions and quickly picked out the one he felt was right for him. It involved clearing out a group of bandits disturbing a certain town within the territory of the faction. Just as he was about to register it, he saw it go blank. "Who?" He looked at it curiously, and looking at the side, he saw a young lady registering the same mission. As long as a mission is registered by one person, a second person cannot take on the same mission. The time limit for the mission was a week and it gave out 48 points. If after a week the young lady is unable to complete the mission, then it would reappear on the board. Once the mission was registered, the array on the board as well as the badge would react. As long as its success isn't reported within that time frame, the mission would reappear. Each member's badge also had something like a tracking device to pinpoint their accurate position. There's also a way to send a distress signal back to the faction if any of the members were to be in danger. Gray could only look for another mission. He focused on the ones that gave out high points. His gaze soon landed on a particular mission. he had to search for a particular herb, and the location of the herb was stated on the board. The reward was around 60 points. This one then, he muttered before heading to the place where he could register the mission. I would like to take the floating clover mission, he said politely to the young lady sitting on the other side of the table. The floating clover? The young lady asked. A slight shock appeared on her face, but she quickly hid it. Yes. Gray nodded. Are you new here? The young lady suddenly asked. Yes. Gray nodded. He noticed the change on the young lady's face when he picked this mission. I guessed as much. This mission is extremely deadly. Even a peak overlord plane elementalist has gone and he was unsuccessful. In fact, he's still bedridden after almost 3 years. The young lady said slowly. She looked at Gray and asked, Are you sure you want to take this particular mission? Chapter 825. Gray walked out of the faction gate, heading in the direction of his mission. He appreciated the young lady's goodwill in warning him about the dangers of the mission, but since he needed the points, and knew he would be safe, he took it anyway, against her will. One of the things that gave him confidence in this mission was that the greatest issue with the mission was poison miasma. Of all the things, this was one of the few things he was not afraid of. He could even send out miasma. Since gaining the ability, he had only tried it out once. When he recalled this, he felt a bit regretful not using it on the Horned race. The time frame for the mission was around 2 weeks, and the young lady said she would stay there till Gray returned. She felt Gray was being too proud, so she wanted to see him when he returned as not only a failure, but also injured. The main reason she warned him was due to the unity of the faction. Since Gray wanted to be an ungrateful person, then she would let him suffer. It was his choice to begin with. I think you irritated her. Void chuckled. It's her choice. Gray replied. On his way out, he saw Keith returning to the faction. Heading out? Keith walked up to Gray. Yeah, I'm out of points. Gray replied. I figured. See you when you return. Keith patted his shoulder before walking into the faction. He was just returning from a mission, and he wanted to report it before his time was up. Gray nodded before he continued his journey. According to the map, it would take him around 3 days to get to the location of the herb. 3 days went by in the blink of an eye. Gray was currently seated in a town close to where the floating clover was located. Gray had read about this floating cover from one of the books he read. It was a powerful medicinal plant, however, it only grew on places with thick miasma. Getting it was extremely difficult. Do you sense it as well? Gray asked Void telepathically as he took a sip of the wine he was drinking. Since leaving Klaus, he rarely drank wine. When he got here, they only sold wine, so he had no other option. Yeah, however I can't tell how powerful they are. Void replied. Gray continued drinking his wine. When he was done, he paid for it and left. After leaving the tavern, he headed toward the west. The floating clover was located in that direction. While he was in the tavern, he heard that this was the worst time to venture into that place because the strength of the miasma increased during this period. He would need to wait for 1 week if he wanted to enter. For Gray, he didn't care if the miasma was on its highest point, it wouldn't cause him any harm. After leaving the town, he sensed some people rushing toward him. However, they were hiding their presence. He already sensed them the previous day, so he wasn't too bothered. The fact that he could sense them showed that they were at most in the Overlord plane. Well, so he hoped. After walking for over 1,000 kilometers, the people came out. It consisted of 7 people, each at the peak of the Overlord plane. Who are you people? Gray asked calmly. He wasn't feeling threatened by them, after all they were all in the Overlord plane. He could tell these people were stronger than a regular peak Overlord plane elementalist. Each of them was almost on the same level as those beasts he fought against, so fighting against 7 of them would be difficult for him. You offended someone you shouldn't. One of them said. I've offended a lot of people, do you mind telling me which one? At least that way I'll know who to kill. Gray said coldly. You don't deserve to know. the man stated, and rushed at Gray. The other 6 rushed after him as well. Gray smirked when he saw this and nodded his head while making a strange hand symbol. The gravity suddenly increased and the people rushing at him felt their bodies grow heavier. "What's happening? I thought she said he could only do this within 5 meters of himself." One of the men panicked. "Maybe he hid his true ability, but we will still kill him," the man leading them said. "Hee, you're dead." Gray chuckled and Void appeared beside him. Void was not the only person that appeared by his side. 3 more figures appeared by him as well. They were identical, with their eye colors being different. It was none other than the Horned Men he captured when he entered their realm. He managed to subdue them, and they agreed to work with him. Of course, he took some precautions before agreeing to it. He placed an array in their hearts and horns. The moment they tried anything funny, they would die immediately. At first, they refused, but when they realized Gray didn't mind killing them, they finally agreed. Besides, this was better than dying. Gray was stunned when he found out that they could hide their horns from people. He placed the trio on different sides, and with the help of Void and a new array he created, he could use the gravitational field without them powering it. The short time the Horned Men had spent with him had been nothing but shocking. They were amazed by his abilities. The appearance of the trio stunned the group who wanted to attack Gray. After sensing that they were at the peak of the Overlord plane like them, they felt they could defeat them. They also felt the array had an effect on all of them. Gray and the Horned Men exchanged glances before charging at the men. The Horned Men preferred physical battles, and Gray was also a fan of it as well, so they started a brawl with these 7 men. Chapter 8:26. Gray and the Horned Men fought like savages, according to the 7 men, anyway. Elementalists usually fight with elements. Gray and the Horned Men were a bit different, fighting with their fists. With the help of the gravitational force field, the men were unable to move at their peak. "Escape!" the leader of the 7 men said, and rushed in another direction after he managed to free himself from one of the Horned Men. The others did the same and tried to escape. "Don't chase after them, prepare to attack," Gray said to the Horned Men as they were about to rush after them. They nodded and prepared to attack. To their surprise, all 7 men appeared on the same spot they were previously standing. Amazing! The Horned Men were once again shocked by Gray's ability. Unknown to them, this was all Void's doing. With his domain, only those in the Sage Plane could escape from his clutches. The 7 were shocked by the familiar scenery before them. Before they could even react, Gray and the Horned Men pounced on them. With Void's help, the Horned Men and Gray working together, it was only a matter of time before all 7 men were beaten to a pulp. Gray looked at the 7 men. He got an idea of who sent them after him, but he wanted to be sure. "Now, who sent you here?" he asked with a cold voice. "You won't get anything from me," the leader of the group answered. He could barely talk, but he was reluctant to say the name of the person who sent them after Gray. "I see. Do any of you know who sent you?" Gray looked at the others. They shook their heads, and he smiled in return. He turned to one of the Horned Men and nodded. The man walked close to one of the men sitting on the ground. He placed his palm on his shoulder, and the facial expression of the man started to change. As time went on, the man started to scream in pain, shaking from severe pain. Gray didn't speak, neither did any of the Horned Men. They watched the scene unfold before the eyes of the others. A few minutes later, the man stopped moving completely. He was dead. "I'll ask again, who sent you?" Gray asked with a calm look. The men exchanged glances, and the leader of the group shook his head to the others, indicating none of them should give Gray the answer he was searching for. "Whom? Stubborn?" Gray shook his head before pointing his hand at one of the men. Black mist left his hand and shot toward the man. The man tried to dodge it, but he was too slow and it entered his body. Everyone looked on with curiosity, even the Horned Men. They didn't know what Gray sent out, but they all knew for sure that it was a dangerous substance. A minute went by and nothing happened. This surprised the men, even the Horned Men. "You can't even do anything. Without your helpers, you're nothing," The leader of the group mocked. Oh, really? Gray raised a brow before looking at the man once again. The man still had a composed expression, but everyone soon started to see a change. His eyes were turning black, and blood started coming from his ears and nose. What? Why are you people staring at me? The man asked as he saw everyone's gaze. One of the men pointed at his face. The man couldn't help but raise his hand. When he touched it, he saw black blood. He was stunned because he couldn't feel anything. Just as he was about to ask where the blood came from, he shivered uncontrollably and started to have a seizure. He bled slowly, shaking from the pain. However, unlike the first man who was killed, he didn't die even after over 5 minutes. Gray didn't rush things, he watched on curiously as well. This was the first time he was using the miasma, so he knew nothing of its effect. Astonishingly, it didn't work like the normal miasma. Instead, it seemed more brutal, causing a higher harm. The man continued suffering under the gaze of everyone. Please end this. The man begged. When the others heard this, they looked at Gray with a scared expression. They didn't know what Gray did to the man, but they could tell he was suffering given the fact that he was pleading for death. What did you do to him? The leader of the men asked. He's wishing for death, but can't have it. This worse kind of torture. I wonder if you will still keep your mouth shut after experiencing this. Gray turned to the other men and added. As for you guys, you either speak, or I kill you one after the other, and he still tells me what I want in the end. The men exchanged glances. They all knew he was correct. After they were dead, the man would most likely speak the truth after they were dead. It's... One of the men quickly spoke up with the hope of keeping his life. You traitorous bastard! The leader of the group yelled at the man who told Gray of the lady's identity. It was just as Gray suspected, it was the young lady he eliminated from the faction. Looks like I have to settle her later on. I don't want any disturbance whenever I'm traveling. Gray said. He didn't expect the young lady would hold a grudge about the matter and even sent people to wait for him. Luckily, she didn't send people in the Sage plane, or he would have been in trouble. You can go, I won't kill you, as for the rest. Gray's eyes went cold and he sent a black orb at the other men. The man who told him about the identity of the young lady stood up and ran as fast as he could. Void, end him. I thought you said you wouldn't kill him. You're the one killing him, not me. Chapter 827. Just when Gray finished killing the others, he sensed something and his expression changed. Boom! A large explosion resounded out and Void's domain was forcefully broken. A Sage plane elementalist. Gray didn't need any confirmation to know of this. Without even thinking, he brought out one of his teacher's talisman and crushed it. The horned men flashed and disappeared. Gray still didn't know how they were able to remain alive on his storage ring, even after researching it countless times. Covered by a bright light, he rushed in the direction of the location of the floating herb. According to what he knew, these people wouldn't be able to get into the place. A middle-aged man appeared and chased after him. The man had a skinny build, and he exuded an eerie aura. Gray didn't need to speak to the person to know that he was a necromancer. The man chuckled and rushed after him, laughing. To him, Gray's escape was a futile effort. He chased after Gray and his expression soon changed when he saw where Gray was entering. He paused and looked at Gray with a stunned expression. Fool, you'll die if you enter there. The necromancer said. He wanted to kill Gray and make him one of his puppets. From the previous battle, he could already tell Gray was a talented individual. The domain made him even more astonished. Chase me in here if you can. Gray's voice echoed into his ears as he watched Gray charge into the miasma without fear. Fool! The necromancer stopped and looked at Gray with an annoyed look. He had been tracking the aura of the mark for thousands of meters, only to get here and lose the target. He felt irritated because his journey was a waste of time. To him, the second Gray walked into the place, he was dead. The thought of even trying to retrieve his corpse didn't cross his mind. He wasn't that desperate. If Gray wanted to die, then he would let him be. He decided to wait for some time. Once Gray tries to come out, he would capture him. Gray, on the other hand, was speeding through the miasma. He wasn't even affected by it, rather, he could feel some sort of resonation, and the miasma in his body started to churn. Void was currently hidden in his storage ring, since he couldn't risk staying in the miasma. On the way, he saw some beasts that had adapted to the miasma and lived there peacefully. After a few turns, he found a cave and hid there. Damn it! This stupid mark, I need to get rid of it as soon as possible. He complained as he sat down cross-legged. He closed his eyes and meditated. 2 hours later he calmed down. He's gone. He couldn't sense any sign of the man, so he felt a little settled. From what he guessed, he felt the man thought he was dead, so he left the place. Time to search for this herb. It shouldn't be hard, he thought as he walked out of the cave. According to the books he read, the herb Gray in places with high concentration of miasma. As long as he followed the energy of the miasma, then he would get it quickly. When he started exploring the place, he saw corpses of people who had died while venturing into the place. Not just that, but even that of beasts as well. This place isn't simple, he muttered. 1 hour later, he was standing in front of a cliffside, and beside the cliff was a floating flower. It was none other than the floating clover. So easy? He was a little taken aback since he felt it should have been a little harder than this. He was about to collect it when he heard a rustling sound. The sound was followed by a roar. A large boar charged at him. The boar was radiating black energy from its body. This must be the work of the miasma. To think magical beasts were able to adapt to this, he thought as he dodged the charge of the boar. After dodging the charge, he released a powerful flame attack that sent the boar flying. With 3 more moves, he was able to kill the boar. Strange, it's weaker than a magical beast outside, Gray said as he acquired the floating clover. He couldn't leave now since it was still too early. The risk of encountering the necromancer was too high. Staying here for a day or 2 will be enough to ward off any attempt of the man to wait. By then, once he leaves, he could safely return to the faction and hide for some time. This was one of the things he hated the most, yet he was forced to do it once again. Just you wait, once Void gets to the Sage Plane, he will kill you all, Gray thought to himself. With that he went back to the cave to hide. He decided to cultivate with the time he was in the cave. When cultivating, time moves by quickly. Before he knew it, 3 days went by in a flash. He should be long gone by now, Gray said as he started to venture out of the miasma. When he got to the peripheral of the miasma, he waited to see if he could sense anything. After not sensing anything, he crushed another talisman and rushed in the direction of the faction. All he wanted right now was to get to a city and use the teleportation array. He couldn't make any teleportation arrays since he was still too weak. But he was sure that once he gets to the Sage Plane, he should be able to do it. At that time, he would make arrays wherever he goes to make his return journey easier. Thousands of meters away from the poison miasma, in a hidden cave, the necromancer was seated, tending to his injuries. By his side was the corpse of an old man. He was still recovering when his eyes snapped open. Impossible. Chapter 828. Gray's figure flashed through the sky as he hurried to the city close to the miasma. Even though he couldn't sense the necromancer, he still didn't want to take the risk of moving at a slow pace. At this point, all his points would be dedicated to learning more about arrays. He couldn't even take the risk of trying to gather the points and use them for a cultivation ground where Void would break through to the Sage Plane. If things didn't go as planned, then he would use the treasure in his place. Besides, it wasn't like those from the faction were going to steal it from him. His only fear was that the powerful experts and some of the people in the Sage Plane would be able to peek into his house and find out that a cat was actually absorbing such a valuable treasure. This was one of the main reasons he wanted to use a cultivation ground since it was extremely secretive. According to what he heard, no one could peek into the place. He didn't believe it completely since he didn't know about the old experts hidden in the faction grounds. While Gray was rushing to the next city, the necromancer was moving through the sky at breakneck speed. He could tell that Gray was moving at a speed faster than his cultivation plane. This was not what he found confusing. Gray should be dead, but all evidence indicates that he was alive, which should be impossible since he entered the poison miasma. After Gray entered the miasma, it was able to block out the connection with the mark. The miasma also had the ability to disrupt the sense of direction of an elementalist after staying for too long. The thought of this mark belonging to someone else came to his mind, but Gray was the only one he sensed within the past few days, and the direction of the mark was the same as the one where the miasma was located. This meant it was most likely the same person. "I'll enjoy killing that little brat," he muttered as he shot through the sky. Gray, who was on the verge of escaping, suddenly sensed a powerful aura rushing in his direction. He couldn't help but twitch from fright. How could he return so early? He was irritated, but he still continued rushing toward the city. He was already close to the city, and from what he knew, there was a teleportation array there. All he needed was to get there and he would be safe. Luckily, he didn't encounter this man when he was coming here. Without any teleportation array, he would have been in danger of being killed when caught. Even his fusion state will not be able to save him from the hands of a sage plane elementalist, especially one that doesn't seem to be in the early stages. Those in the early stages will find it difficult to break through Void's domain, yet this necromancer did it with a single attack. If he was in the mid or late stages, Gray couldn't even dare to imagine the strength of the puppets he had with him. There would most definitely be a puppet in the late stages or even the peak of the sage plane. A single slap from that corpse would easily kill him, not even leaving any part of him. Thinking up to this point, Gray brought out a second talisman and crushed it. He didn't care how difficult it was for his teacher to make them, its use had come. His speed increased substantially after using a second talisman and he rushed toward the city. A few minutes later, the visage of a city appeared before him. Without even pausing, he flew straight into the city. This was prohibited, but he should be able to escape punishment since he was part of the Permand, and this area was within the jurisdiction of the faction. The second he flew into the city, he sensed the auras of some powerful figures in the sage plane. An idea soon came to him and he headed in that direction. An old man appeared before him. "Stop, flying in the skies of this city is prohibited," he said as he stared at Gray coldly. "I'm a member of the Permand faction." Gray showed them his badge before heading to the ground. The men followed him as well. "I'm sorry, I was being chased by an elementalist in the sage plane. I had no other choice but to fly over here." He apologized in a calm and collected manner. The men looked at Gray, and looking in the direction he was coming from, they could sense a faint aura rushing in the direction of the city. Looking at these men, Gray was able to quickly figure out that the strongest looked to be in the mid-stages of the Overlord plane. He wasn't 100% sure of this, but he felt a sense of confidence in his judgment. "All right, we'll confront whoever it is," the man said. "I would like to use the teleportation array now," Gray said. The men exchanged glances before replying, "You have to wait until we get verification of your story." "That isn't a good idea. I don't want to complicate things for you," Gray said, still calm. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait." Gray honestly didn't want to bring any trouble to them, but since they wanted him to wait, he didn't mind waiting. He knew these people felt he stole the badge and was running. One thing most people outside the faction didn't know was that if the badge of a member of the faction is not in a faction member's hand, it will automatically explode. Gray could hand his badge to another faction member that has a badge with him, but he couldn't hand it to others. However, if the badge was placed on the ground, maybe during an attack or something, then it would stay in that spot until it was retrieved by the faction or it explodes from another person touching it. This is a fail-safe placed on the badges to ensure others wouldn't be able to use it to access the faction in any case where the original owner dies. Chapter 829. This was a city where its strongest individuals were in the sage plane. Had Gray been one of the famous geniuses from the faction, they would have at least known of him, but they knew nothing about him. And from the way Gray was in a haste, they felt he probably stole the badge, and the original owner was chasing after him. Gray naturally wasn't bothered with them. If they could deal with the necromancer chasing him, he wouldn't be bothered, but if they can't, he would use the teleportation array while they were fighting. The men stood guard and watched as the necromancer got closer. When they sensed the eerie aura he was radiating, they knew he was trouble. They turned to Gray and he shrugged as if telling them, "I told you before." "Who's he?" the oldest man in the group asked Gray. "A necromancer who wants to kill me. See why I'm in a hurry now?" Gray said plainly before asking, "Can I go now?" "If I leave, he will leave this place alone." The man nodded. From the necromancer's aura, they knew they were not his match, so fighting against it was not something they dared to attempt. Being in the city made things even worse. The casualty would be on another level. "You little brat! You can't escape!" the necromancer yelled, and a ball of light shot straight into the city. Crash! Bang! The light landed in the city, causing a large explosion. It was followed by the appearance of a pale-looking figure, standing in the wreckage. The pupils of the old man in the sage plane dilated. This was a sage plane corpse, and it was at the peak. "Run!" he said to Gray, and he told the others to activate the city's protection arrays before charging at the corpse. He couldn't take the risk of letting the necromancer send in another sage plane puppet into the city since it would be detrimental to them. Gray nodded before rushing in the direction of the teleportation array. The corpse moved its head and looked in the direction of Gray. A pale blue flame lit up in its eyes, and it rushed after Gray. The old man stood in front of it as he tried to block it from advancing. It waved its hand, and a pale blue flame appeared that sent the old man flying. Gray, who was on the verge of escaping, sensed the flame and his eyes widened in shock. This was the same flame he had, however. There seemed to be a different energy in this corpse's flames. It was chilling. An icy flame? He was taken aback by this, but this didn't stop him from running anyway. His life was more important to him. There seemed to be a glint of intelligence in the corpse, contrary to how corpses usually act. The corpse avoided fighting with the men in the sage plane. Its target was clear, Gray. "Void, what do you think about this guy's flames?" Gray asked as he ran away. After leaving the poison miasma, Void rushed out of the storage ring. He was bored there, so he quickly exited. Seeing that Gray was on the run, he couldn't help but mock his predicament. To think all this stemmed from Void having a black elemental grade. Had they not taken the test in the forest, Gray would have never crossed paths with necromancers. The corpse dodged all the attacks of the men as it rushed after Gray. The attacks, however, slowed it down, so Gray was able to get to the teleportation array before it was able to get close to him. Gray instantly activated the array and waited for it to start up. The other men delayed the corpse, but their attempts were futile since at the last minute, when Gray was about to be sent out, the corpse got close and attacked the teleportation array. Gray quickly countered with blue flames of his own. Both flames crashed, and although it didn't destroy the teleportation array, it seemed to disrupt the teleportation tunnel, and Gray was already in it, unable to exit. When the corpse sensed Gray's blue flames, it paused for barely a second and looked at Gray in shock. Its eyes shone bright, and a blue light shot straight into the spatial tunnel, which had completely enveloped Gray, sending him in another direction. Gray and Void were thrown into a chaotic spatial tunnel that didn't seem to have a definite destination. "This is bad, this is bad." Gray panicked. He watched the tunnel in front of them slowly break apart from the front. As long as the path they were currently on breaks as well, they would fall into space, even though they didn't die. Leaving this place would be almost impossible, even for two space elementalists like Void and himself. Their abilities were not at that level yet. "Void, what do you do?" Gray asked in panic as the spatial tunnel continued breaking apart. Presently, they couldn't even head to their destination, much less exit the tunnel. "What can we do?" Void replied with a wry smile. For the first time, Gray realized Void didn't have a solution to their current predicament. Their hopes were on the brink of getting shattered when a bright blue light shot straight into Gray's head. He couldn't even react before the light entered his body. While Gray was trying to escape from the necromancer, a figure was hidden in the void, watching him as he was held back by the old men from the city. The young lord surely does have a knack for getting the attention of these guys. Could it have something to those guys? They must have marked him, so troublesome. A voice muttered as he watched the scene before him unfold. This was the man protecting Gray from the shadows. He had been with him all this while, even when he went to the faction. He was naturally sensed by the old figures in the faction, but after speaking with them, he was allowed to wait outside for Gray whenever he wanted to head out. When Gray entered the poison miasma, he wanted to rush in and bring him out, but after careful observation, he realized Gray didn't seem to be affected by it. He also saw Gray using his miasma, as well as those horned men he subdued. Gray seemed to bring him surprises whenever he wasn't with him. Even if it was only a month or two, Gray would grow by leaps and bounds, amazing him every time he sees him again. Even after following Gray for so long, he didn't dare to say he knew all of Gray's moves. He had seen how secretive Gray was, so he was sure there must be a move he was keeping hidden, waiting for the right time to use it. He watched on as the necromancer sent the corpse inside the city and how the corpse chased after Gray. Seeing the corpse almost destroying the array, his eyes flashed a little, but he didn't panic. After Gray's figure had entered the spatial tunnel, he waved his hand, and the man as well as the corpse disappeared. He also appeared on the teleportation array momentarily before disappearing once again. Looks like I can't get him to his desired destination, but I can ensure he isn't in any form of danger, and also appears on the continent. As for where he appears, that has to do with his luck. He thought as he forcefully tore into space. When he arrived, the spatial tunnel was on the last part. He focused his energy and tried to bring out a destination for Gray and Void. While doing this, he brought out the necromancer and dumped him into the turbulent space. The spatial tunnel with Gray and Void stabilized after some time, to the ecstasy of Gray, who had truly lost all hopes. What happened? Gray asked as he realized that the spatial tunnel suddenly stabilized. Luck? Void replied, unsure. He knew for a fact that the spatial tunnel was breaking apart, and it would take a powerful individual to fix it. Or maybe they were just that lucky. My luck is not that good, Gray replied. He could tell that their current destination was different from where he was supposed to appear. Did someone help me? He thought, a little bit confused. Chapter 830. On an island somewhere far from the Permanent faction. A rip appeared in space and a figure shot out of it, crashing into the ground. The figure was of course Gray, who had an issue with his teleportation array. When he landed on the island, he looked around, trying to figure out his current location. How lucky, I got to appear in a place with an active volcano, yeah, he said sarcastically as he looked at the large volcano that had smoke coming out of it. They appeared close to the volcano. Looking around, he noticed he couldn't see anything other than a large sea of water. He didn't even know where he was, which was worse. At least you're alive, stop complaining, Void replied after climbing onto Gray's shoulder. How come I look like a wreck and you're fine? Gray couldn't help but ask. They were both thrown out of the spatial tunnel, yet he was the only one who seemed to have crashed. I landed on my feet, unlike you who crashed into the sand with your face, Void mocked as he looked around. Other than a few beasts, he couldn't sense anything else in this place. There's food, I think we're pretty lucky, he muttered. Gray cleaned his face before grabbing Void and tossing him to the ground. To his dismay, Void landed on his feet and stuck out his tongue mockingly. After the duo played around for some time, with Void being the victor in their small battle, they finally decided to tackle the issue at hand. Gray brought out the Horned Men and sent them out to scout the island and see what they could find. After being with them, he finally knew their names. The first guy he captured outside the trial land was called Birch. The two he captured inside were Braden and Basil. All three brothers had different elements. One was a water elementalist, the other was a space elementalist, and the last was a wind elementalist. What do we do now? Void asked, his expression more serious this time. "I have no idea," Gray replied. This was what happened to Ellis when he appeared in the Azure continent. What he felt was worse was that he had no clue where he appeared. If he was still in the Aurora continent, he would be delighted since going back to the faction would be easy, but if not, then he would have to think of a way to leave the place. This was his greatest fear. The duo stayed on the island, waiting for the return of the Horned Men. A few minutes later, they returned with what they could find. Other than magical beasts, there were no other things living in the place. They also sensed the presence of a beast that should be above the Overlord Plain, which frightened them. The island was around 3 kilometers or so Gray ticked out the area where the beast was located. Other than that, the volcano seemed to be on the verge of erupting. Where will these beasts go to if the volcano erupts? Gray started to brainstorm. From how the volcano looked, he felt if it were to erupt, it would most definitely affect this place, which was only around 3,000 square meters. If that is the case, then the entire island would be affected by the eruption. The beasts living here would naturally have to flee for their lives. While thinking about all this, he also thought of the possibility of the volcano not being too violent when it erupts. There's a chance that it might only cover a small area. In conclusion, he didn't want to leave his fate to chance. Leaving this place should be our priority. Void, you can fly, so all the work in finding the next patch of land lies on you. If you can find a boat, that will be even better. Gray started to give out orders. Void nodded to his words and immediately took to the sky. With the connection between the duo, he could find him even after moving thousands of kilometers. Gray was still speaking with the Horned Men when a thought suddenly struck him. "Come back." He called Void telepathically. After doing that, he brought out a plaque-like item. It was the tracking device he made when he was still in the Azure continent. As long as he was in the Aurora continent, then the light dots of his friends will most definitely appear. He prayed in his heart as he activated the device. Joy appeared on his face when he realized there wasn't only one dot on the device. "Yes." His expression changed when he saw the distance between the lights. "This should still be the Western continent, but I'm in no way close to the faction. Getting back before the mission's time runs out will be difficult." Gray sighed when he thought of his wasted points. He couldn't help but curse at the necromancer, wishing for him to die. The points he worked hard to get would be gone, just like that. He was still cursing at the necromancer when he felt a strange sensation coming from his body. "Ooh?" A confused expression appeared on his face and he turned to look in the direction of the volcano. One of the things he suddenly realized was that even with the smoke coming out from the volcano, the island was still chilly. He didn't get to think about it before since he was preoccupied with the thought of leaving this place, but after calming down, he was amazed by the temperature of this place. "Why's it cold?" he blurted out. He looked in the direction of the volcano, wondering if it was the cause of the chilling air. For some reason, he also felt a strange connection with the volcano as well. Void had returned, and hearing Gray's question, he couldn't help but think about it. "Strange," he muttered, looking at the volcano as well. In a place with an active volcano, it was quite odd that it was this cold. This is the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed and wish you wonderful rest of the day. The Silent Raptor's out.